This is 1979. And Charles Jackson is driving to his grandmother's house.
Charles called on her a little earlier, did not get an answer. This worried him, so he decided to check in on her.
Grandma? It's Charlie. Grandma, are you here? Grandma?
What the hell? There are dishes in the sink, and there's a faucet dripping, both of which are very unlike her.
Grandma? Grandma, are you asleep? Are you here?
And it's unspeakable.
Oh my...
Just a few miles away, rookie detective Joe Kenda is settling nicely into his new role with Colorado Springs PD.
Nice job on that interro, Kenda.
Thanks, Lou. I appreciate that.
You're really coming along.
In late August of 1979, I was a detective in the Crimes Against Persons unit.
Hey, boys. Just got a call about a body out on East Monument. Smith, ready for another one?
You got it.
It's all yours.
So this particular case, Lou Smith was the person assigned as the lead detective. Smith was extremely experienced and was a phenomenal detective. At that time, there were no teams, there was no organization like it turned into years later. The case came in the door. The first detective the sergeant laid his eyes on was the lead detective.
Within minutes, Detective Lou Smith arrives on scene.
When Smith arrives, it's the usual circus of marked units and all the chaos that goes on when you arrive at a homicide scene.
Evening, Detective.
Hunley, clue me in.
Victim is an 85-year-old elderly female named Catherine Simpson.
Heart attack?
I'm afraid not. Her grandson found her inside with multiple stab wounds. The scene is pretty gruesome.
All right. Well, let's take a look. No sign of forced entry.
None that I can tell.
When Smith enters the home, he observes that there is no sign of forced entry to the front door. He then proceeds into the living room.
This belonged to the victim?
Yes, sir.
She's got over $50 here.
The victim's purse does not appear disturbed, and the first deduction you might get out of that is this doesn't appear to be a robbery.
What's this?
There's a pair of women's underwear on the floor.
This could just be misplaced, but let's make sure we bag that in case it plays into what happened.
When he goes into that kitchen, he sees some dirty dishes in the sink. He also sees a blue apron on the floor that appears to be damaged slightly.
Let's make sure we bag this as well.
Yes, sir.
Noticing underwear and a torn apron in the kitchen, you're starting to think this is possibly some kind of personal attack.
Where's the body?
It's in the bedroom. Yes, sir.
My God.
The victim had been stabbed multiple times, was laying on the bed.
The likelihood of sexual assault is very great.
Is that a yardstick? What the hell?
She's only been dead a short period of time.
Who did you say discovered the body?
The victim's grandson.
Oh, I think maybe I should probably speak with him.
Not this way.
She's been assaulted and murdered in her own home. What kind of a monster would do this?
Just doesn't make sense.
Mr. Jackson, I'm Detective Smith.
Hi.
I'm very sorry for what happened to your grandmother.
Charles is, of course, immensely distressed. He has seen what has happened to his grandmother.
Can you tell me about your grandmother? Were you close with her?
Yeah, we were really close. She basically raised my brother and I.
He informed Smith that she's lived in Colorado Springs since 1920, and she's been in this particular house for over 20 years.
She was 85 years old, but you couldn't tell.
She stays active tending her garden out back, especially her prized tomatoes. So she's not an invalid by any means.
Was she typically out and about in town?
No, she had cataracts, so she didn't drive anymore. I mean, she could still take care of herself, but my brother and I, we'd help her with groceries, things like that.
Charles Jackson explains that he and his brother took very good care of her. They talked to her every day and helped her in every way that they could. And on this day, he called her in the morning and spoke with her.
Did she say anything was wrong when you talked with her?
No, everything was fine. And then when I tried to get a hold of her this afternoon, she didn't answer.
What was a typical day like for your grandmother?
Mr. Jackson said that his grandmother was a creature of habit. She would eat her dinner at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and would immediately do the dishes.
Looking at the scene, we see that the dishes haven't been done.
She was probably attacked while she was in the act of cleaning up, which would have been shortly after 4 o'clock that afternoon. It's shortly after 4 o'clock when she's in that kitchen, alive, and 7:30 she's in the bedroom dead. So in that 3.5-hour period, a perpetrator probably entered through the back door and the attack progressed.
Thank you for your time, Charles. And I promise we're going to find who did this to your grandmother.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Kenda, you're just in time.
So what can I do?
Help me canvass this neighborhood. It's likely the suspect went in through the back of the house. We need to find out if someone saw or heard anything suspicious.
That makes sense.
This was a small community, little neighborhood. They keep an eye out for one another, so we're hoping somebody saw something.
And we can start with that guy.
Smith looks at the house next door and sees a man sitting on the porch drinking a beer, obviously taking in the activity of the police.
Evening, detectives.
You live here?
No. House sitting for my parents. They're out east on vacation.
I'm Detective Smith. This is Detective Kenda.
James DeCoin. What happened over there?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. Did you happen to see any strange activity at Mrs. Simpson's house today?
Nope. Can't say that I did.
He says he remembers seeing Catherine Simpson in her backyard gardening, which he says is her habit, and he became sleepy and he went inside and took a nap. And he was awakened by the police activities.
What time would you say you took that nap?
Oh, about 3 o'clock or so.
Sir,
What's up, Dan?
we got a call of a potential suspect in a park down the street.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Mr. DeCohen. If you should happen to remember anything else you saw, you give us a call.
Will do.
When Smith talks to this guy, Smith gets that old feeling.
Part of being a good detective is having kind of a seventh sense where you actually can start feeling whether this guy is actually telling you the truth when you talk to somebody or if there's something hinky about him. Detective Smith had that good sense. He didn't feel that this individual was really being honest or truthful. He was hiding something, but he had nothing to go on, so nothing to really follow up at that time.
There's something about James DeCoin that just isn't quite right, and Smith makes a mental note of that.
I'm going to go check this out. Continue canvassing the area, will you?
You got it.
So Detective Smith responds to the neighborhood park where patrol officers are holding a underage 17-year-old male.
What's your name, son?
Cole.
Cole? Cole what?
Cole Michaels.
This guy looks like he's been drinking. He's a little bewildered, a little disheveled. He doesn't know what's going on.
What are you doing out here by yourself, Mr. Michaels? Wait a minute. What's that on your pants? Looks like blood.
This is really starting to pique our interest because obviously we have a bloody scene and the person who did this did not walk away without any blood on him.
Yeah, I cut myself.
Oh, yeah. On what?
Who is he? Is he just some kid who has an injury from some other source? Or is he a murderer who killed a little old lady in a house next door?
A quick records check reveals a bench warrant out for Cole Michaels' arrest.
So they inform Cole he's under arrest and take him into police headquarters and question him further about this murder.
I gotta be honest. That looks pretty recent to me.
I got it yesterday, I swear. I wouldn't.
And looking at these two wounds, they appear fresh, and it's not unlikely that when you stab somebody, even with a pair of scissors, that you're not going to get some injuries.
Okay, Cole. We want to ask you some more questions, but before we can do that, your mother has to arrive. So, right now, we're going to confiscate your clothing.
Okay.
Come with me. Put your hands over the table like this. Palms down.
This individual was 17 years old.
Flip them over.
Colorado law states that a minor can't willingly or knowingly waive his rights without a parent being present.
While they're waiting for the mom to show up, they are permitted to take evidence from this person. So they're taking photographs of his injuries, and they're also swabbing his hands to see what they may find in a laboratory as to what may be on his hands.
Within the hour, Cole Michaels' mother arrives at the station and grants an interview with police.
So you think my son is involved in a murder?
Quite possibly.
Cole, is he serious?
Mom, I didn't do anything. I swear, I didn't.
For anyone who's had a teenager, this is like your worst nightmare.
Your son was found sleeping on a park bench with blood on his clothing, less than 4 blocks from a murder scene. And we'd like to know why that is.
You told me you were staying with your brother.
It was, but he and I,
Look, okay, Cole, just why don't you start by telling us exactly what happened today?
Okay.
This individual explained that on this particular day he'd worked till about 3 o'clock. After work, he went out drinking with his friends till about 1 o'clock, at which time he went to the park to sleep, and that's where he was contacted.
He tells Smith, I've been staying with my brother, but we got in an argument and he threw me out, and I've been sleeping in the park for the last couple of months.
So you went directly to the park after being downtown?
Yeah.
And you didn't stop someplace?
No.
And this cut on your hand?
I got it at work yesterday. I must have nicked it again today.
Now, this kid has an explanation for his whereabouts, but is it true? Maybe, maybe not. Smith's not going to just believe him.
Detective Smith calls the lab to see if the samples taken from Cole earlier corroborate his story.
Okay. Thanks for calling.
And none of his samples match anything found at the crime scene. So there is nothing to connect him to this offense other than proximity, which is not enough.
With his first lead a bust, Detective Smith hopes the autopsy might turn up new evidence.
Okay, Doc, what you got?
Well, no surprises in terms of what killed our victim.
Cause of death is from internal bleeding from multiple stab wounds to the chest.
We did notice something interesting regarding evidence of a sexual assault.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
There isn't any.
What? You're kidding.
That seems very odd. If you're going to tear clothing and remove underwear, what is it that you're doing?
That's not what we expected. We really expected to have some biological samples to indicate sexual assault.
How often do you see clothing disturbed like that and no evidence of sexual assault?
Hardly ever.
So maybe his attempt was disturbed by something.
That's very possible. This perpetrator may have had one thing in mind, and it got changed, and in a fit of rage, he kills her, and he runs.
Thank you for this, Doc.
You bet. Good luck.
This elderly, frail, 85-year-old woman was murdered. We have no motive. Nothing's adding up yet.
The autopsy results raise even more questions about this person. Who is this? What is this?
Hey, Lou. Call just came in for you.
Who is it?
Charles Jackson says he's grandson of last night's murder victim.
I'll take that.
Okay.
Hey, Charles. Detective Smith.
Hi, Detective.
What's going on?
So, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but my brother and I were going through my grandmother's finances, and we found something that's a little bit strange.
Charles notices that she has not deposited any of her stock dividends or Social Security checks for the last 2 years. And this is a little unusual.
2 years? Any idea how much money that might be?
It looks to be somewhere around $5,000 or $6,000.
So she would cash her checks, and she would keep the money in First National Bank manila envelopes.
In the 30s, at the beginning of 33, there was such a bad economic depression. The banks began to run out of money, and people would literally run to them and line up around them to try to get their deposits out before the banks ran out of money. People of the Depression, which Catherine was, it was not at all unusual for them to bury money, tape it to the back of dresser drawers. My goodness, my grandfather, my father, they hid gold in pipes, they buried it in the ground. And my grandfather was a prison warden, for goodness sake.
Any idea where she might have kept it?
Well, whenever I'd take her grocery shopping, she would usually go into her bedroom and get money out from under the dresser.
Her dresser. So, how does a little old lady like that stuff cash way under there?
It's actually kind of funny. She would use a yardstick.
Smith almost dropped the phone. He'd been wondering all along why there's a yardstick on the bed.
This is actually very helpful. Thank you.
Knowing that she kept money under the dresser, we had to go back and examine, and we found out that it was gone.
So why look in the purse? You've got $5,000 in cash, so you don't need to look in the purse. You need to run before somebody finds you.
Meanwhile, Kenda hopes that recanvassing the neighborhood can turn up new leads.
Do you remember any suspicious activity over at Catherine's house? People going in and out?
Myself and my partner were assisting Smith in this investigation, trying to locate witnesses.
No, I was out of the house most of the day. My wife wasn't home either.
Okay. What about unfamiliar faces in the neighborhood? Anything like that?
I haven't seen anybody like that. But there is somebody that I've been a little worried about.
And who's that?
His name's Daryl. A number of people in the neighborhood have had their houses broken into recently, and I think he's the one doing it.
They identified this individual as a white male in his 40s, and what they really were concerned about is that he supposedly always carries a handgun.
He definitely gives me the creeps.
And do you know where Daryl lives?
Yeah, it's just down the street, at the Blue House.
Thank you for your help.
Well, let's go see Daryl and see what value he may have in this case.
Could I help you?
What they find when they get there is some highly intoxicated individuals partying early and midday.
Shut up back there!
We're looking for Daryl.
Daryl! There's some people here in suits! They want to talk to you! Stay right there, Ma! I'll be right with you.
Morning, gentlemen. What can I do for you?
It's not a crime to be drunk at 11 o'clock in the morning. Could he be drinking that early because he's in celebration of $5,000 coming into his possession? Is he a potential killer?
Daryl, why didn't you tell us where you were yesterday afternoon?
Yesterday? I was here most of the day.
Doing what?
You know, throwing a couple back with my mom and pops.
How nice. Family that drinks together stays together, I suppose.
Were you here all day?
Nah, I went down to the dog track around 3 or so. It's usually what I do.
The dog track in Colorado Springs was a greyhound dog racing track with limited stakes gambling. It no longer exists, but at the time in 1979, it was extremely popular.
Did you go there with anybody?
No, I was there by myself. What are you asking me all these questions for?
Daryl, we need to know where you were when your neighbor, Catherine Simpson, was killed.
That old lady? No, I ain't have nothing to do with that.
Is there anyone that can verify you with the dog park?
You know, I think I have a betting slip around here somewhere. Let me check. I'll be right back. Stay there. Talking somewhere. There it is. Here.
They show a timestamp for the day of the murder where he's gambling from 3 p.m. in the afternoon until they close at 9 o'clock that night.
Happy?
Thank you, Daryl. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, Mom!
So Daryl is interesting, pathetic, a drunk, and maybe a burglar, but he's not a killer. He has no opportunity to commit this crime.
With leads disappearing before his eyes, Smith joins the canvas in hopes of drumming up a new one.
Excuse me.
Is this about Catherine?
Yes. Were you friendly with her?
Oh, yeah. She was such a sweet old lady. I can't believe someone would do something like that to her.
Did you see her yesterday?
Yeah, in the morning.
She says she saw her wearing curlers in her hair and working in her garden in the front yard, as is her custom in the morning. And then she goes to the backyard in the afternoon.
Was she talking to anybody suspicious? Someone in the yard, maybe?
No, not that I saw.
What about in general? Any of these neighbors have any issues with Catherine?
No, I can't imagine that anyone would have a problem with her. But I do remember she complained about a neighbor of hers.
She did explain that Catherine complained to her numerous times, but the people who were living next to her were very weird.
Especially the son. She had a bad feeling about the son.
Do you know the name?
I don't remember the parents' names, but the son was James DeCoin.
This is the very same fellow that Smith had this awkward feeling about. The guy sitting on the porch drinking beer next door, James DeCoin.
Did she say anything else about him?
Not that I remember.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Ma'am.
Now we're getting information that Detective Smith's feelings probably were justified. Something doesn't add up with this individual. It's time to go back and talk to him.
Can I help you?
Detective Smith, CSPD.
Yeah?
Is James DeCoin here?
No. I'm Colin, his brother. This is my wife, Lydia.
Hi.
Do you know where your brother is?
No, we've been trying to figure that out ourselves.
Colin says, we came over to clean the house before my parents returned from their vacation, but we find that it was already clean when we arrived. James is gone, and all of his stuff is gone.
Any idea where he may have gone?
No, I mean, he didn't leave a note or anything, and couldn't have went far. He's broke.
Colin says he doesn't have a car, he doesn't have any money to call a cab, he doesn't have anything.
Why are you looking for him anyway? Is this about the old lady next door?
Lydia pipes up and says that she had read about this homicide in the paper, and she started getting a bad feeling and was concerned that he may be involved.
Why do you say that?
Well, he's had some issues with the law before. In fact, he just got out of jail in Pueblo not too long ago.
For what?
Sexual assault.
Every alarm that Smith has in his head is going off about James DeCoin. How did he get gone? He didn't have any money. He's been in jail for sexual assault. Mr. DeCoin is not just a person of interest now, he's a suspect.
Last name is DeCoin, D-U-C-O-I-N.
Following up with Pueblo PD as to James's original charges, we find out that he was released about 10 days ago. He was supposed to contact his probation officer in 5 days.
If he checks in with that probation officer, I'm going to need you guys to hold him, okay? Okay, thanks a lot, John.
Special delivery. I just barely beat the garbage truck.
Bring it to the conference room.
At this point, the case is starting to focus more on James. We knew that he just cleaned up the house, so one possible area where we might find some evidence is in the trash.
Okay, dump it.
Here?
Yeah, right on the table. Dump it out.
Oh, man.
Welcome to homicide, Kenda. It's a disgusting business. Get used to it.
You dump the trash on the table, and you go through it one piece at a time. Not the glamorous part of the occupation.
Garbage is like hieroglyphics. You can find out a lot of stuff from garbage.
Gross.
Criminals aren't very bright. They tend to throw things away that might incriminate them or demonstrate their involvement in a crime.
What do you got there?
It's an envelope. It looks like it's been burnt.
What kind of envelope?
The kind you get money from a bank in.
Another one right here.
Well, my. Now, what are you doing with those, Jimmy? So we sit down and reason that if he has no car, how does he leave the property? He calls a cab because now he has money. So we go to the cab companies in town.
I'm not seeing anything in that area on the 29th.
What about the 30th?
Okay, here we go. I'm seeing a pickup on East Monument around 8:45 a.m.
They find out that they did pick up an individual at the residence where James was living and took him over to the area of Garden of the Gods.
That's got to be him. What's the exact address where he was dropped off?
I'm actually not seeing one. It looks like he was just dropped off at the intersection of Garden of the Gods Road and Nevada Avenue.
He could have been going anywhere.
The frustrating part of that is that was mostly small retail shops, so it's like, okay, needle in a haystack here.
Yeah, we could get a canvas started in the area.
It's going to take some time, but I suppose we might as well. Thank you for your help.
Sure thing.
While Kenda and other investigators scour Garden of the Gods for a witness, Detective Smith locates another potentially helpful source.
Lucy, thank you for agreeing to see me today.
No problem.
While we're doing the cab thing, Smith is trying to locate any known associates. When people run, they'd contact people they know. So Smith finds his ex-wife.
After we got divorced, I basically cut off all contact.
Why was that?
He couldn't control his drinking. I put up with it for a while, but then he started getting pretty violent.
She said, at one point he held me at knife point for 2 hours. Said he was going to cut my throat. Oh, that's nice. You know, anything else?
It wasn't just the violence. He was also into some pretty weird stuff, sexually.
What do you mean?
So at this point, the story takes a really creepy and interesting twist. She said he had taken her to one of the few hotels at that time that showed pornographic movies. And he tied her to the bed for 2 hours while he attempted to masturbate with essentially no success.
So, when that would happen, would he become violent?
No, he would just get really frustrated.
So how does all that fit together with our crime scene? Well, we have a woman forcibly disrobed and no evidence of sexual assault. The obvious conclusion is Mr. DuCoin is not capable of sexual assault. Even though he may have the desire, he doesn't have the ability.
Did you go to that motel a lot?
No, he wanted to go more often, but it just weirded me out.
Do you remember the name of that motel?
Yeah, it's the Pink Panther over on Nevada Avenue by Garden of the Gods.
Well, isn't that interesting? The day after the murder, he's dropped within a block of the Pink Panther motel by a cab driver.
Lucy, I want to thank you for your time. You've been a great help to us.
Of course.
I'll see myself out.
So Smith immediately gets in his car and heads for the Pink Panther, see if they have a record of James DuCoin getting a room.
DuCoin?
D-U-C-O-I-N?
Nothing with the name DuCoin, but to be honest, I doubt he would have checked in under his real name. Most guys don't.
What about a face? You recognize him?
Oh, yeah, sure. I remember this guy. He was here a couple of nights this week.
James had stayed there the 30th and the 31st. That had been the day after the murder and the subsequent day after that.
How'd he pay for his room?
Cash.
Did you happen to notice if he had a fair amount of cash on him?
Oh, yeah, he had to have. I saw one of them call girls going in and out of his room a couple of times, and they ain't cheap.
For a man who is broke, where did he get this money? We're thinking he got it from the little old lady that he murdered.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem.
While the circumstances point to James DuCoin murdering Catherine Simpson, Smith would feel much more comfortable if he had some hard evidence to back it up.
Hey, Lou.
What's going on, Kenda?
Got some news back from the lab. They examined those burned envelopes. Guess where they came from? First National Bank. The same bank that Catherine Simpson cashed her checks at.
Well, I'll be damned. Let's go to the judge to get an arrest warrant.
So now there's no doubt in our minds that James DuCoin is our killer. Now it's a matter of running him to ground. We're going to find him and arrest him for first-degree murder.
But investigators quickly learn that might be easier said than done.
In the course of hunting him down, we find a sister in California who says that she got a phone call from James DuCoin from a payphone in Florida. What does that mean to us? Mr. DuCoin has crossed a state line.
But sadly, investigators fail to find James DuCoin, and the case goes cold.
There are some cases that are so disgusting and so abhorrent and so violent that they don't ever go away. They just don't. And Catherine Simpson is one of those cases. It just bothered me to no end. Where are you? So 12 years on from this event, I am now a supervisor in homicide.
It's Kenda.
The phone rings in my office, and it's the FBI.
DuCoin. Yeah, of course I remember that one. You're kidding. No, I'll send someone down right away. Thank you.
They have found James DuCoin in New Orleans, Louisiana. Finally, the long arm of the law has reached out and tapped James DuCoin on the shoulder. You are responsible for murdering a little old lady. You thought we forgot, but we don't forget, and we don't forgive.
Afternoon, Lieutenant. You wanted to see me?
Hey, Steve. You heard about the arrest of that cold case suspect down in New Orleans?
Absolutely.
Detective Smith had retired from the police department at that point, so there's no way he could get involved in it. Detective Wood was in homicide at the time, and Wood had an excellent talent for interrogation.
All right. Go get yourself up to speed on the case file. Your flight leaves first thing tomorrow morning.
Yes, sir.
So Wood goes to New Orleans, meets up with an FBI agent. They go to the field office where DuCoin is being held.
So you've already spoken with DuCoin?
Briefly, right after we arrested him.
And how did that come about exactly?
Truthfully, he just kind of fell in our lap. We surveilled him and arrested him without issue.
When the FBI found him, they did so because Mr. DuCoin had applied for an identification in the state of Louisiana. And for some reason, he used his real name, and it popped up in the FBI database.
Mr. DuCoin, I'm Agent York. This is Detective Wood.
Mm-hmm. Mr. DuCoin, I was wondering if you might answer a few questions for me.
About what?
About a little old lady named Catherine Simpson, found murdered in Colorado Springs in 1979.
I don't know nothing about that.
He completely denies any knowledge of the investigation, but Detective Wood continues to work and talk to him.
How did you get into her house?
I told you, man. I have no idea what you're talking about.
James. Can I call you James? Why did you have to stab a little old lady with scissors? Do you think she deserved that?
I ain't a violent person, man. I didn't do that.
Well, maybe you're not now, but you were then, James. It's got to be eating you up inside. Why don't you just let it out?
All right. The hell with it.
Wood gets to him. It takes him a while, but he gets to him.
You got a cigarette? I remember I was outside having a drink. I saw the old broad putting around in her garden.
And he thinks, a little old lady like that probably has money squirreled away in her house. James DuCoin doesn't have 10 cents.
Later that day, I saw that her back door was open. I saw that as my opportunity. Show me where the money.
Please don't.
And where's the money?
Please don't. I got some in here. Please don't hurt me. Oh.
He says she doesn't resist him. She takes him into the bedroom.
You got your own little bank here.
He says that when he's down working on these envelopes, Catherine Simpson suddenly starts screaming for help in a really loud voice. It startles him.
I tried to quiet her down, but I couldn't. I panicked. And I stabbed her.
Okay, James. I appreciate your honesty. But I don't feel like you're telling the whole story there.
Well, that's all that I remember.
If you look at his story, it's full of holes. It doesn't fit the evidence at the scene.
When investigators found Catherine's body, her skirt was hiked up and her underwear on the floor. Did you try to sexually assault Catherine?
No. No way.
James, that doesn't sound all that believable to me.
Well, I don't care what you think. That's what happened, all right?
He confesses to this crime. Is he willing to tell Wood everything? No. Criminals are very odd in that regard. They will find certain things that they won't admit to, certain things they don't want you to know, certain things that embarrasses them.
Where did you go after you killed her?
Back to my parents. Took a bath, fell asleep, woke up to all the sirens.
Do you remember talking to a Detective Smith?
I do.
He says Smith freaked him out.
I burned all the envelopes, cleaned the place up, then I left.
So he left that house the next day and stayed at the Pink Panther for 2 nights. He bought a $70 bus ticket in Colorado Springs, and then he went to Florida and stayed there for years.
I eventually made my way to New Orleans under a fake name.
So what made you apply for a license under your real name?
I was just tired, you know.
He said he stayed away from people, and he got very lonely, and he was distressed at having to lie about who he was.
I couldn't take it anymore.
There are some people, they won't admit it to you, but they want to be punished. They know what they did was a horrible thing, and their guilt eats away at them an inch at a time.
Although DuCoin's confession leaves much to be desired, he is formally charged with first-degree murder.
James DuCoin pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. This case is an illustration of why humans are so dangerous. Hey, this little old lady, what has she done to anyone in her whole life to suffer a violent end over a little bit of money? It's insane. It is insane what people will do. And the more you see of it, the more disgusted you become. When you have a truly innocent victim, it becomes inspiring to find who's responsible.
The phone rings at 4:12 a.m., a thin blade of sound cutting through the coastal quiet, and somewhere between the palms and the patrol cars, the town holds its breath. The dispatcher's voice is crisp, metallic, a shard of news pressed to the ear. Missing waitress, Saturday close, silver sedan left idling behind the diner, purse still on the passenger seat, register locked, camera frozen at 02:03:17. And in that exact second, the humidity seems to thicken. The headlines write themselves, and a thin fog crawls in from the inlet like a rumor that won't sit still. They will say later she was light on her feet, a church choir smile, last to leave, keys on a pink lanyard, 3 miles of dark asphalt between the diner and a rented duplex, where every porch light burns past midnight. They will say, Mat Tik Bien, cold case, Sok Kong Dong, because in towns like this, the gulf between what everybody knows and what nobody can prove is a gulf where shadows learn to stand up and talk. And the camera's eye blinks and stalls, a digital hiccup, a smear of static like a black wing folding over a single frame, a face, a hat, or no face at all, only the echo of motion that pushes the door open and swallows her whole. We roll up on the scene, and the cop lights wash the alley in the colors of a bruise, blue and red pulsing against a dented dumpster and a strip of crushed shells, and the cook with flour on his forearms is already talking too fast, naming names like a rosary, swearing he saw a pickup ease past the window twice, then vanish. The manager is counting receipts with trembling fingers. The clock over the pie case insists it's 2:11, and the coffee on the warmer tastes like it's been waiting for the wrong person to come back. On the back step, there's a scuff where the heel of a shoe dragged, 3 clean scratches on the frame where something hard, key, ring, buckle, caught and snapped. The silver sedan whispers from the dark. Dome light dead, driver's seat warm, air still holding the trace of sunscreen and lemon lotion. In the cup holder, a folded grocery list. On the rubber mat, a tiny seashell caught in a strand of blonde hair. You don't build answers from details like these. You build corridors and let the questions echo down them until you can tell which door the echo fears. By sunrise, the story is already outpacing the facts. A jogger finds a necklace on the boardwalk and we tape off the planks like a stage. A bartender calls in a tip about a man in a baseball cap who never drinks, only watches. A neighbor remembers a new delivery driver who knocked twice on a Wednesday, smiled once, then disappeared. The deputies spread out, forming rings of worry that widen and thin as the heat rises. A helicopter scrapes the sky. A dog noses through sea oats and returns with nothing but sand and a smell it can't keep. The county leans forward, church bulletin prayer lists, reward jars at the tackle shop, photocopied flyers bleeding ink in the rain. Here, gossip isn't a pastime. It's a search party with better shoes. The first week is a bright flare of purpose. The second is a slow drip. By the third, we know the sound of grief learning to pace itself. We gather fingerprints until the cards feel heavier than they should. We dust the sedan and lift a half moon of something we can't place. Palm, glove, and send it to a lab across the state where machines hum like low thunder and label printers spit out tiny promises. We pull traffic cams, boat ramp cams, storefront cams, only to learn that cameras are faithful until they're not. A dead bulb here, a corrupted file there, timestamps that slip like wet rope. We knock on doors. We ask the same 5 questions 100 ways. We redraw a map of the last hour of a life until the pencil dulls and the paper frays, and still there's a missing street that runs straight through the middle. Summer pushes into fall, and the case file grows fat and quiet. Headlines cool, the alley dries. The palm fronds keep whispering the same rumor. Nobody sees the thing they don't expect to see. The silver sedan gets towed to a hangar where cars go to sleep and wait for a dream that will name them. The diner survives by habit and coffee. At the church, a candle burns out and is relit without ceremony. At the precinct, a box labeled with her name slides from one shelf to another, closer to the back, where cold air and fluorescent hums keep the years orderly. We send swabs to databases that reply with silence. We watch a generation of phones arrive with better cameras than the town ever had, and we collect footage of parades and sunsets and storm surges, and not one of them tells us what happened behind the diner at 2:03 a.m. Time rearranges people. The cook who talked too fast leaves for a job inland. The bartender gets sober and stops remembering the man in the cap. The delivery driver legend grows and shrinks depending on who's telling it. The manager quits counting cash and learns to sleep. The deputy who took the first statement transfers, then retires, then fishes. The mother keeps the porch light on until the bulb finally gives up, and even the hardware store owner can't quite meet her eye. The town learns to carry the case like a pocket stone, something to rub when storms roll in, something to show visitors who like their beaches with a side of mystery. You can hear it in the rhythm of things: church bells, school bells, weather alerts, the hushed syllables at the farmer's market, cold case, mat tik be on, hai vong mong mon, hope described in voices too careful to say the word. Then the years turn like pages, and a storm season rips open a stretch of the old highway. Crews dig. Backhoes scoop the red dirt where a billboard once promised lottery luck and cheaper tires. There, under the root clutch and bottle glass, a bone shines like a secret deciding it's tired of hiding. Work stops. Deputies call. Then we kneel. We open the ground with hands, with brushes, with breath held. There's a ring, plain, scuffed, inscribed on the inside with 3 letters that never made the papers. There's a hinge from a lanyard. There's fabric that still remembers pink. And then there's the way the air changes, the way the road noise recedes, the way the day leans in as if it has been listening for permission to move on. We box everything with cotton and care. We tag it with a date that sounds like an accusation. We drive back without the radio. In the lab, the years are stripped off one molecule at a time. A technician with steady hands and a patience that borders on prayer extracts DNA from the bone like a song rescued from a scratched record. It isn't much, but it breathes. It aligns. It says, I belong to the file that slept in the hangar, and the mother who kept the light on, and the town that learned to speak in the past tense around an empty chair. The match is quiet, clinical, final in the way a sunrise is final. You can't argue with it. You can only call it by its name. And suddenly cold case becomes case. And suddenly the boxes shift again. And suddenly the phone rings at 4:12 a.m. For a different reason. A database somewhere in another state inhales and exhales a hit. Partial, distant, but real, on a relative who once filled out a form and mailed back a kit and believed that families stick together even when they're made of strangers. We run the new map. We redraw the rings. A name floats up like a fish that's touched the hook before and remembers the sting. A seasonal worker, back in 2003, who fixed ice machines and walked with a limp and told a story about a sick mother up north that nobody verified because who verifies kindness? He had a storage unit for tools. He paid cash for flexibility. He left at the end of August because the storms were bad. His file is thin, a paper napkin with a phone number that changed, an address that belonged to a porch with no steps. But the machine prints his surname next to our lost girl DNA like 2 magnets remembering they do. In fact, have opinions about each other. We knock again. We search again. We call the state again. We find the unit emptied a month after the disappearance, swept clean except for a single washer fallen into the lip at the back. We find an old landlord who liked him fine, and then stops liking him at the mention of our year. We find a photograph of a company picnic, and there he is, too close to the edge, cropped by oversight or intention. Eyes not on the camera, but on whatever is happening just out of frame. An arrest follows the way thunder follows heat, slow to start, then unavoidable. They find him 2 counties inland, older by 2 faces, in a bungalow that leans. On the coffee table, a stack of unpaid bills. In the closet, a hat he still wears without noticing how it infects the room with the old rumor. In a tackle box, a key ring with a broken hinge. In the sink, nothing but soap and the need to run the water first before you breathe. They read him words that add up to a promise and a warning. He nods like he's hearing instructions in a language he once knew. The cuffs click, the door shuts, and somewhere near the inlet, a mother stands very still in a doorway she's walked through 10,000 times and lets the porch light be off for a minute without reaching for the switch. Florida 2003 cold case solved, the headline declares. Hungry for ink, jubilant as a marching band. The anchors lean into their microphones as if the story might duck. The town exhales in a long, marching late line. But solved is a word that sometimes sits on a case like a fresh coat of paint over a wall that remembers every handprint beneath it. In the interrogation room, he says almost nothing, then something, then nothing again. He counts days instead of answering. He asks for a lawyer. He watches the clock as if time owes him rent. The DNA doesn't put him in the alley. It puts him in the orbit. The lanyard hinge is persuasion, not gospel. The hat is suggestion. The washer is a whisper. The highway gave up bones, not reasons. The prosecutor stacks what we have, checks the weight, wonders if the scale is honest today. The headline shouts, solved. The file clears its throat. Now the town must relearn the case in a new tense. People say closure and mean mercy. People say justice and mean mathematics. People say finally and mean never again. In the diner, there's a framed photo of her smile next to the register and a small plaque that reads, "Be kind to the late shift," as if kindness could turn the clock backwards and stand in the alley with a better outcome in its pocket. At the church, the candle burns without drama, less a beacon than a stubbornness. At the precinct, the box moves forward on the shelf the way a boat noses into a slip, but it does not vanish. We hold pressers. We avoid adjectives. We tell the story in clean lines and active verbs so nobody has to imagine the static on the tape or the heat in the alley or the way an empty car can smell like an argument with God. And yet, when the sun drops behind the palms and the sky burns the color of cautions we've learned too late, somebody somewhere replays the tape in their head and pauses at 02:03:17 and swears that if they squint, they can see a second figure, a shape within a shadow, a collaborator that never learned its own name. A retired deputy hears a detail in a newscast and sits up in bed, heart thudding like a fist on old wood. A boat captain remembers a pickup stalled on the bridge the night after she vanished, driver sitting too still, eyes on the water as if it might answer a question politely. A teenager from that time, now middle-aged, unfolds a memory of a storage unit door rolled down too fast. Our phones answer in the dark with small buzzing throats. We write notes in margins already too full. We learn that solved can still mean look again. If you stand at the boardwalk at dawn and let the gulls stitch the air with their unruly grammar, you can feel the town trying to forgive itself for all the things it didn't know how to see. The planks remember our tape. The rails remember the touch of hands that needed steadying. The sea keeps doing what the sea does, erasing and returning, as if the shoreline were its own unsolved case. We tell ourselves the arrest is a door clicking shut, and maybe it is, but somewhere in the file is another door that opens onto a room we haven't entered yet. A room where the camera didn't fail, where the coffee didn't sit, where the sedan was just a car and not a question. Until then, the headline stands like a lighthouse set a few degrees off. Bright, noble, almost right, not quite. And the voice that carries across the water, this voice, keeps calling the case by the name it earned in the beginning, cold, and by the name it refuses to give up, hers, and by the name the town learned to say soft enough not to frighten the truth. Come back, tell us, make it whole. They open the bungalow like a book left face down in the middle of a storm, and the pages are damp with a life that never expected to be read aloud, a pile of receipts curled like dry leaves, a calendar pinned to the wall with 3 months missing, a postcard of the panhandle with a thumbprint of Greece where the coastline should be. The search warrant breathes on the coffee table like a low, steady engine. Every drawer is a potential headline waiting to spring from the dark. Man moi ki la, Kwan kak bung no, cold case rehung. The bed is made, too tidy by half, corners tight as if the act of smoothing could iron out a decade of questions. Under the mattress, standard check, they find nothing but a film of dust the color of concessions. In the closet, a line of shirts facing the same direction, collars turned like inmates waiting for count. On the top shelf, a shoebox with elastic bands, and inside the long, slow drip of a man's small life. Ticket stubs, a motel key without a tag, a receipt for a padlock, a photograph of a boat ramp at dusk without people, without explanation. He calls out that he wants a lawyer from the kitchen, where he sits still, hands flat, elbows not quite committed to the table, as if the furniture could change its mind about supporting him. Evidence doesn't announce itself. It flirts. Behind the dryer, a slip of paper that took a decade to make the jump. A diner's punch card barely touched, the ink bleeding into a ghost of a stamp that could be a palm tree, could be a starburst, could be the memory of a hand that once held coffee at 2 a.m. The date line is half-eaten, but the year is clear. 2003, the shape of a 3, like a crooked grin. On the kitchen counter, a plastic magnifier with a nick on the rim. On the windowsill, a tiny glass bottle that once held machine oil, a favorite of men who don't like squeaks, men who listen for betrayals in hinges. In the pantry, everything is labeled, not with words, but with placement. You could blindfold yourself and still find the salt by the angle of the light on the third shelf. Control masquerading as order, fear playing tidy. The tackle box on the coffee table is the kind children point to on weekends, and men nod at like praise. It opens with a clack that feels less like a sound and more like a curtain that's been told what to do. Inside, hooks filed to a whisper. Sinkers lined like a procession, a coil of leader wire that remembers being around another thing, tighter than it wanted to be. And deep in a foam slit, a small metal ring, the hinge of a badge lanyard, or the twin of it, winking in the lamplight like a tooth someone forgot to apologize for. It is not proof. It is not salvation. It is a sentence that is yet to find its verb. The text, photograph, measure, bag, seal. In the hallway, the clock ticks as though it's chewing something stubborn. We rewind the tape of his life, frame by frame. Employment records show bursts and absences like the pulse of a runner who stops to tie a shoe they don't intend to fix. Ice machine repair, seasonal motel maintenance, a hurricane cleanup crew that paid cash and left no forwarding numbers, a bait shop that closed for good when the owner's son decided college had better hours. He changed addresses like hats, never too far, always close enough to recognize the smell of the water at dawn. Neighbors describe him as quiet, helpful, good with clogged drains, good with engines that cough, good with the kind of troubles that can be fixed with hands and a willingness to show up. When asked if he had friends, their faces tilt as if trying to recall the word from a language they once knew. He had people he nodded to, they say. He had a way of being there without being in it. The interrogation room is a theater without applause, a square with laws. He sits in a chair that generations of suspects have tried to root around with posture and charm and tactical boredom. He chooses silence. It rolls around the table like a marble that refuses to fall into any hole we hold open with the right prompting. The attorney arrives with a folder and a handshake that is almost kind, and the dance becomes a shuffle. We show a photo of a hinge. We show the punch card. We mention DNA in the way a weather report mentions a storm that will probably change course but might not. He looks at the table. He counts something only he knows how to count. He asks what happens next with a tone that suggests the question is rhetorical, and we should all be grateful he voiced it. Meanwhile, the town steps into the storyline like it's a play that was always rehearsing off stage. Old tips wake up and stretch. New ones knock twice and wait. A man swears he saw the silver sedan not once but twice that night, heading north, then south, like a compass testing itself. A woman remembers her dog barking at a fence line that never interested it before. A retired line cook digs in a junk drawer and finds a Polaroid of the diner's back lot with a delivery truck parked crooked, a detail that means nothing and everything depending on who's looking. The church bulletin adds lines to the prayer list and subtracts none. The newspaper, the print kind, still alive, still stubborn, runs a Sunday feature. Cold case, Kong Dong Bang Huang, Hai Vong Tro Lai, a collage of a town's stubborn refusal to forget. And then the case file, so long content to sleep like a stone at the bottom of a river, starts to rise and turn, revealing new faces of itself in the light. The storage unit manager, the one who once shrugged and said he remembered nothing, develops a memory under pressure like film in a darkroom. He recalls the way the door stuck if you didn't lift and push at exactly the same time. He recalls the hat, yes, and the limp, and a morning of rain so hard the gutters on the row of units filled and overran like the edges of a bad story. He recalls a smell, chemical and sweet, the kind that says cleaning without actually cleaning. We pull the unit records and find a relic of a signature, the curve of a letter that matches an old rental line at a different lot across the county line, December 2003. We drive out. A new manager, a new gate code, the same old architecture of secrets rented by the month. Locker 17 bears no imprint of any past bombast. It's a rectangle of stale air and dust that behaves like opinion. But there in the rear lip, the swept broom forgot, because brooms always forget the places that matter, is a single washer, darkened by time, edge-polished by agitation, the twin to the one in the foam slit of the tackle box, the cousin to the hinge by the window in the bungalow, the brother to the glint we saw in the evidence photos from 2003, and talked ourselves out of believing. The tech's eyes meet ours in that coded language of the hunted and the hunter. This could be nothing. This could be the kind of nothing that tips a building. We bag it. Chain of custody tightens like a belt. We tug at the edges of him in public records the way you pull at a thread to see if the seam will give. There's a fine from 2002 for a broken taillight he never fixed. There's a complaint from a neighbor in 2004 about a truck blocking a driveway. There's a hunting license that lapsed, a permit for a boat that never saw water, a box on a form left empty where an emergency contact should be. We visit the mother up north that he once used as a conversational shield. She died in 2001, the obituary says, with 3 lines of kindness and the names of 2 sons, one of whom is him, except the photo shows a young man with eyes that look left when everybody else looks straight ahead. We reach the brother and hear a voice that tries to square loyalty with suspicion and finds neither to be a safe house. The lab work trickles in with the indifference of a machine that doesn't have to live in our town. The hinge bears skin cells so old they need coaxing, and even then they only clear their throat. The washer offers more, a whisper of sweat locked in its micro grooves, a testimony of touch the human eye could never swear to in court, but a machine can pronounce like liturgy. It doesn't shout his name, but it writes the first letter on the chalkboard and underlines it twice. We add the lines to the board, we redraw the map. We see his bungalow as the last in a necklace of rentals and storage units and odd jobs that form a shape not unlike a noose around the town's patience. Witnesses are not photographs. They develop in motion. The bartender with the baseball cap story finds better words for his memory when we sit with him under a ceiling fan that stutters like a heart with a non-urgent complaint. He describes the quiet man who watched more than he drank, who chose a seat with his back to the wall and his face to the door, who once asked, casual as rain, when the diner closed on Saturdays and whether the alley had a light. The delivery schedule from the beverage distributor, buried on a hard drive that should have retired years ago, puts a box truck at the rear lot that night at 1:50 a.m., with a driver who signed with a flourish that makes handwriting analysts salivate and robots roll their eyes. That driver is gone to Texas, then gone to Myth, then located in a trailer where the air conditioner bravely loses. He remembers a pickup idling too long, a man leaning on a fender as if listening to the engine tell him a secret he planned to keep. Here is the thing about answers. They don't arrive as answers, they arrive as momentum. One tip leans into another, and suddenly you're sprinting downhill, where you used to push the chain uphill with your hands. In an old city camera archive that the clerk swore didn't exist anymore but did, misfiled under parade, we find 2 frames from a traffic cam that caught a sliver of the diner's back street in the minutes around 2 a.m. The frames are bad. The light argues with the lens. Digital snow falls in July, but there, between the static and the smear of an overexposed taillight, is a shape we can measure. A pickup with a dent at the rear quarter and a toolbox mounted flush to the cab. The dent matches a repair invoice in 2004 for a used truck he offloaded for cash. The toolbox matches the shadow in the old photograph from the company picnic where he was captured not looking at the camera. We put the frames on the board. We put the repair invoice next to them like a caption finally found. But tack is wily. It doesn't know how to leave. The prosecutor needs more than the nervous system of a ghost. A hinge and a washer and a punch card and a dent are a symphony, but the jury needs the instrument names and sheet music with neat notes. We go back to the alley. We walk it at the same hours, through the same humidity, with the same line of sight. We time the shadows. We pace the steps from door to car to corner to highway. The camera in the diner's back office, frozen at show 20317, is resuscitated by a specialist who treats broken footage like an injured bird, cupping it in warm hands, whispering to it. He extracts one more frame nobody noticed, a half-second earlier, where the static thins and the outline of a cap brim tilts toward the door. The brim does not confess. It does not name him. But it insists that whoever opened that door came wearing a choice they'd made many nights before. In the bungalow, we search again because every house is 2 houses, the one you see and the one that sees you. In the gap behind the stove where builders stash their sins, we find a scrap of fabric fused to a dust cake, pink faded to an embarrassed blush. Lab work will take its time. Lab work is a god that wants offerings and schedules. We keep moving. A neighbor's security camera, not a thing they had in 2003, but a thing they cling to now, offers footage from 3 months ago of him lugging a heavy duffel to his trunk with a posture we recognize from old surveillance tapes we didn't get to keep. It's nothing and everything. Proof he had hands, proof he carried things, proof bodies learn to perform the same motion the way a song learns its own chorus. The arrest paperwork gets inked. The charge sheet learns his name in the context it has been circling for years. He's marched out under a sky that has the bad manners to be perfect. The town crowds the sidewalk behind tape that isn't necessary but feels right. Reporters push microphones like flowers the bereaved didn't request. The sheriff says words that sound like closure and bear the weight of alleged, that soft legal cushion that keeps the story from breaking its own neck too early. Florida 2003 cold case solved, the chyron flashes, and televisions clap themselves on the back. But we know better. Solved is a word you rent month to month until the landlord laughs and says, keep it. At night, the inlet breathes in and out, and we count the breaths, because counting is how you survive things you cannot end. The mother sleeps with the porch light off for the first time, and wakes in the dark and reaches for a switch that isn't on her wall anymore. The cook who left comes back for a long weekend and stands in the alley to measure his memory against reality, and learns again that memory is a copy of a copy of a copy. The bartender stares at the seat where the man with the cap used to sit and wonders how many true things can fit inside a person's ability to look ordinary. The delivery driver in Texas smokes outside and watches a truck idle at a light and shivers the way a dog does when a storm is miles away. The technician in the lab runs the fabric scrap through its paces and hums a song that has no words and all the patience in the world. We return to the board and erase nothing. We add a question mark next to the word accomplice, because somewhere in the retold story there's a second shadow that refuses to decide if it belongs to a person or a trick of light. We circle the highway mile marker where the soil gave up its secrets and draw a dotted line to a boat ramp with good cover and a sight line nobody thought mattered until now. We punch our way through the complacency of a decade and call the night shift worker at the motel that backed onto the alley, and she answers on the first ring as if she'd been holding a phone for 12 years just for this. She remembers a half-torn page in the logbook, a supervisor's instruction to skip the back cameras, bad bulbs, a man who asked if anyone ever parked behind the dumpster because he'd seen raccoons, and raccoons are fun to watch if you don't care about anything else. The voiceover would like to hand you an answer in a velvet box, to say the town can lay down its weight, to declare the script a straight line drawn with a ruler across a map where everything fits. But this is a coastal town, and lines curve like shorelines. This is a human story, and people change shape when you look away. So the camera stays close, the mic stays hot, the sentence keeps winding. We follow the trail, not because we're sure it leads us out, but because walking it has become the way we live here now. The headline hangs above us like a sign at a road that's been half built. Solved ahead, detour in effect. The air smells like the moment just before rain, and if you listen, you can hear the chorus of all the words we've used to keep the silence in check. Cold case, mat tick be-an, shock, clue, break, stall, surge. Assembling themselves into something almost like faith, almost like a promise the town makes to itself when the lights go out and the camera blinks and the clock finds 02:03:17 and refuses, for a second, to move. They move the case into the courthouse like a storm cloud moves across water, quiet, wide, charged. And the hallway outside arraignment is a low hum of voices trying to soften hard edges with adjectives that don't belong to them. He stands in a suit that fits like an apology borrowed last minute, chin lifted a fraction, eyes grazing the exits first, then the floor, then nothing. The charge sheet is read in a rhythm that feels like a metronome designed to keep a community from skipping beats. Outside, cameras blink, microphones inhale, the news vans crouch on their shocks as if ready to spring, and the headline keeps running laps around the building like a runner who forgot this wasn't a race you win by speed. Florida 2003 cold case solved. Except solved is a word that crowds the room and leaves no chair for doubt. And doubt, the stubborn chair nobody asked for, sits anyway. The prosecutor's board is an altar to order. Timelines pinned in color, maps with string that stretches from the diner to the highway to the storage units to the bungalow, photos with corners annotated in a tight hand, phrases like opportunity window, control motive, access patterns, the new catechism of a town trying to turn ache into argument. Lab techs arrive with slides and language that can split a hair into 12 useful pieces. The washer sings again in spectrums and spikes. The fabric scrap confesses to touch that wasn't random. The coil of leader wire remembers a tension inconsistent with fish. The hinge in the tackle box nods toward the hinge by the bungalow window without ever learning how to speak in sentences. The DNA stays steady, stubborn, an anchor sunk in old bone and brine, calling us back to that date that never stops meaning itself. But the defense is not a mirror, it's a maze. They talk contamination like a lullaby for insomniacs. They talk transfer and common parts and the way washers are washers in any tackle box you'd care to open. They conjure another man, another night, another story that could slide into the gap where our silence used to live. They hold up a cap like a magic trick and ask how many men wore caps in 2003 and how many of those caps left shadows on cameras that forgot how to listen. They pull the word alleged, like a sheet up to the chin of every fact we thought slept soundly. The jury pool shifts in their seats and learns the weight of maybe. We push back by returning to the beginning, not out of romance, but out of duty. We walk the alley with a 3D scan that rebuilds 2003 in the air, light and angles and blind corners resurrected. The measure of the scuff on the door jamb becomes a gate signature, heel drag, matching the limp the seasonal worker never outran. We reconstruct the silver sedan's last idol with a forensic mechanic who hears engines the way a parent hears their child in a crowd and can tell you exactly when an alternator would sigh under humid sky. The timestamps are synchronized by a specialist who treats fragmented seconds like broken glass and fits them by star chart and grid, and the broken camera's hiccup yields a single extra glimmer, a reflection in a chrome strip that suggests a second vehicle idling just out of frame. The accomplice question mark grows a tail like a comet. We chase the tail. A name surfaces in the maintenance logs, a helper who worked sporadic weekends for cash, a man who never left enough footprint to match his shoe size. He is talkative where our suspect is silent, a man who keeps 3 stories warmed on the stovetop and is happy to serve the one you seem hungry for. He insists he was out of town that weekend in 2003, and then he insists he was sick, and then he insists he doesn't remember weekends that old unless they were good, and that one wasn't. He smiles like a sign on a closed road. His truck history, retrieved from auctions and junkyards by a clerk who loves the scent of dead paper, shows a quarter-panel dent repaired in early 2004 at a garage that kept terrible records and one perfect Polaroid of every car they touched. The Polaroid is sunburned at the edges. The dent matches our ghost truck's silhouette the way a scar matches the story that made it. Proximity is not guilt, but it is a current, and we learn to read currents by how small things drift. Credit card receipts from a bait shop place both men within the same 10 minutes on a Saturday morning 2 weeks before she vanished. A fisherman's log, neat, old school, the kind that makes digital natives blink, notes a favor done by M&L to jump a battery at the boat ramp behind the diner. An entry underscored like a debt repaid with interest we never chose. A cashier remembers the quiet one always paying cash, the talkative one always asking the time, as if collecting minutes was a hobby worth bragging about. The voiceover wants to tell you we have momentum. We do. But momentum whistles when it runs past an open shaft, and this shaft has a sign posted, "Keep both feet." A pretrial hearing slices our narrative into admissible and not, and the judge's patience is a scale that everyone claims to respect until it tips their way. The storage unit washer? In. The tackle box hinge? In, but with caveats the size of a roadside diner pancake. The Polaroid of the dent? In for context, out for certainty. The fabric scrap? In, pending a second round of testing that looks at the dust lodged in its weave and reads, like an archaeologist, the story of the kitchen it lived behind all these years. Meanwhile, the mother of the missing woman, no longer missing, never returned, sits in the front row with hands that learned long ago how not to tremble in public. Her eyes are the courtroom's true clock. They move when truth moves. They close when arrogance talks. When the hearing adjourns for the day, she steps into the sun, and the town parts around her the way people step off a curb for a procession, a quiet, slow-motion honor guard of grocery lists and school pickups and broken AC units. She doesn't speak to cameras. She speaks to one child at her side and says something that makes them both lift their faces to the kind of blue sky that doesn't earn it. We dig again, not because we missed something, but because missing is a clever animal and we respect its craft. The boat ramp photograph, the one from his shoebox with no people and too much dusk, turns inside out when a retired deputy turns it sideways and finds, in the reflection on the water, a stuttering echo of taillights double parked where no one parks unless they want privacy. Image enhancement is less about sharpening than about admitting that pixels remember more than we do. The specialist teases out a boxy silhouette next to the larger shadow, a toolbox contour, the exact height that would nuzzle a cab roof. The ramp angle and tide tables from that night are cross-checked. The reflection lines up with the time frame like a key looking for its old door. A rumor starts because rumors are the town's oldest currency. It says he talked in jail, that he confessed to a cellmate, that he didn't so much confess as brag in the coward's code of half-nods and implied verbs. We ignore it until the cellmate's letter arrives unprompted, written in block letters that alternate between shame and theater, and includes a detail no reporter printed. The pink of a lanyard's thread, the scent of lemon lotion. Could he have gleaned it from the way grief stands? Maybe. Could he have guessed and gotten lucky? Maybe. But he describes the backstep scuff with a precision that makes the lead detective look at the door jamb and see the night as if it had just happened while we were all in another room. We move not with certainties, but with convergences. The talkative helper's alibi, sick, out of town, nothing to see, folds at the corner when an old toll plaza spits out a log from a dead server resurrected by a kid who treats legacy systems like vintage guitars. Handle with care, they sing. A plate number half caught on a camera lens matches the helper's truck at 2:26 a.m. Southbound, the direction you'd head if you left a diner's alley with business in your rearview mirror and wake in your wake. The truck, when found years later in a scrap lot with weeds through its ribs, still wears the outline of where a toolbox once sat, the absence stamped on the metal more eloquently than any presence. The toolbox itself shows up in a different county's pawn database, sold for cash, reclaimed by no one, seized for non-payment, auctioned, forgotten, waiting in a warehouse that smells like dust and eventual auctions. Inside, nothing that grips, nothing that speaks, nothing that refuses to be quiet. Court calendars move like tides, predictable, unstoppable, sometimes inconvenient to the living. A trial date assembles itself on the whiteboard like a mouth forming a word it's been practicing. The town prepares in its peculiar way. Lawn chairs, save for those who want to line the sidewalk on day one. Casseroles stacked in freezers of people who will be asked to testify and will need dinner afterward. Prayers stapled to the end of sentences that started without them. The diner hangs a small sign by the register, "Be kind to the late shift," and adds, in smaller type we remember, as if remembering were a menu item you could order and share. In the late hours, the lead detective sits with the file alone, the way a captain sits with a chart in waters they know but don't trust. He flips to the first page, the dispatch time, 4:12 a.m., and then to the photograph of the bone lifted from red dirt by hands that didn't belong to the people who loved it the most. And then to the lab printout where 4 letters line up like a verdict that isn't one yet. He hears the town breathing through vents and over radios, and from stoops where elderly men count cars and call that counting wisdom. He hears the TV in a living room he's never visited say solved again, and he does not turn it off because words have to crash against something to know if they can float. Back at the bungalow, the forensics team returns. Third pass, same square footage, new questions. They pop the baseboard in the bedroom and find an old key flattened into the plaster like a fossil. No markings, no obvious lock, only the weight of metal that waited 20 years for a hand to say, I know you. They lift the laminate in the kitchen and find a water stain in the shape of Florida with a peninsula that points, mockingly, toward the inlet. In a vent, they find a single button, cheap plastic, not special, except that special is how ordinary things behave when they're the only thing left that hasn't told its story. The talkative helper is charged, not with the headline crime, but with the crimes you charge when you want a door open: lying, obstruction, the small resistances that make the big resistances possible. He falters in a way the quiet one hasn't. He names places he shouldn't know and pretends he learned them from the news. He names times he shouldn't remember and pretends he's always had a good clock. He asks, in the third person, what kind of man does a thing like that, as if grammar could save him from pronouns. The DA watches the way men talk when their story starts to leak and prepares to use buckets and patience and the surprise of showing them a mirror when they expected a wall. Night walks the boardwalk as it always does. Heels loud, wind busy, gulls stitching up the day with ragged thread. The candles at the church burn lower. The porch light at the mother's house stays off, not as surrender, but as punctuation. The town isn't free, the town is focused. We stopped hoping for magic and started demanding physics. We stopped waiting for a villain to confess and started listening to screws and strings and dust. The case that slept in the hangar breathes on its own now, not hot, not cold, the temperature of a body that intends to live. A storm forms, then decides against us, then reforms, a seasonal habit of threats that sometimes land. We brace anyway. Sandbags appear at doorways the way memories appear at anniversaries. The highway billboard where the bones surfaced stands blank, metal ribs showing a skeleton interrupting horizon. If you climb the small hill by the ghost sign and look down, you can see the line we drew on the map, the dotted one that never meant much. Cutting through palmetto and memory like somebody's idea of destiny. It leads from the diner to the highway to the ramp to the bungalow, and when the light is right and your eyes are tired, it looks like a seam in the world waiting for a careful hand with a needle. We don't promise you the next scene. We don't promise you a confession that makes the room shift from winter to spring in a single breath. We only promise the camera will stay on, the mic will keep recording, the questions will not apologize for existing. Florida 2003 Cold Case Solved is the banner they hang over our heads. We walk under it with respect and a narrowed gaze. Somewhere between the hinge and the washer and the dust behind the stove and the reflection on the water and the letter from a man who writes in blocks, the answer is turning toward us. It might blink, it might run, it might wait up the road just beyond the last streetlight, where the air smells like rain and old tires and the possibility that a town, stubborn as tide, can outlast the dark. They draft the jury summons like weather alerts, wide net, neutral tone, the kind of official language that wants to sound like no one at all, even as the whole town hears its own name between the lines. And while envelopes travel, the DA's office becomes a war room lit by maps and monitors and the blue glow of late-night resolve. They rehearse the chronology until time itself feels cross-examined. The detective stands at the board and taps 020317 with the patience of a drummer holding tempo for a band that can't afford to slip. Across the river, the defense prints glossy photos of washers and hinges purchased at any hardware store, universal shapes that pretend innocence through ubiquity. They build a model alley on a folding table and roll a toy pickup through it, a bright plastic lie that tries to show how easy it is to be anyone else. The mother wakes before sunrise now, not from habit, but from a muscle memory the body writes when it spends years listening for a car that never pulls in. She sits at the kitchen table with the porch light off, on purpose still, and turns the ring with the 3-letter inscription in slow circles like a minute hand practicing. On the fridge is a magnet with the diner's first ad from the early 90s, all block fonts and promises of bottomless coffee. She runs a thumb along the edge where the paper buckled from humidity the summer everything broke and thinks of the camera freezing, of a machine that forgot how to tell time right when time mattered most. She isn't angry at it anymore. She saves anger for people. The talkative helper pleads not guilty, and then not talkative, which is its own odd confession. He smiles at the press as if they're neighbors at a block party, as if the word obstruction were a misunderstanding between friends. He finds a public defender who has seen men blink too late and design their innocence by committee. The quiet one keeps his head tilted at the exits and his hands still as if movement is a language he no longer trusts himself to speak. Their names thread the county like a fishing line through reeds, invisible until it snags. Back at evidence, the fabric scrap behind the stove goes under a microscope that reads dust like scripture. Pollen grains whisper late summer oak and roadside ragweed. Grease traces map meals cooked without joy. In the warp of the fibers, a pale fleck of something that flares under certain wavelengths. Polymer, cosmetic, the kind of shimmer they put in lemon scent lotion to catch light on skin. The lab techs don't grin, they reduce. They write numbers and probabilities in sentences that refuse to leap. Still, when the report lands on the detective's desk, it plants itself like a flag on ground nobody believed would ever have a name. A hurricane yawns far out to sea and begins the slow, fickle geometry of storms that think they own maps. The town stacks sandbags anyway, tapes X's on windows they swear don't help but do, and buys batteries for radios that will never lose their charm. The boardwalk tourists thin, the inlet darkens in swells that practice being furious. In the courthouse, the air turns colder, the kind of chill that has nothing to do with the thermostat and everything to do with expectation. The judge calls chambers the way a conductor calls silence before a downbeat. Lawyers file in with folders like armor. A new witness appears, not the kind we imagined, not a bartender or a dog walker or a night clerk who remembered the way a hand hovered over a door handle. A maintenance trainee from 2003, now a man with worry lines and a habit of smoothing his tie when he tells the truth. He remembers a service call 2 weeks before she vanished. Ice machine on the blink, back door propped open with a plastic crate. The quiet one already there, the helper late. The alley lit by a bulb that hummed. He remembers the quiet one testing the latch and frowning at the scuff where a striker plate caught. He remembers a comment made to no one in particular. Back doors always tell on you. He thought it was a joke about drafts. He logged the work order. He filed the memory. Life happened. Storms came. A county aged. Then he saw the headline and felt the old phrase kick like a fish in a bucket. He calls it in. He shows up. He sits straight. On the stand, he gives the door its voice back. We run down every workshop that sold that particular striker plate model between 2002 and 2004, and a storeroom in the back of a shuttered hardware shop coughs up ledgers with pencil entries and dust that writes your name on your shirt when you breathe. 4 units sold to the hospitality company that owned the diner, 3 to a contractor whose invoices match the quiet one's cash jobs. 1 cash purchase, no name, a date that sits like a coin on a fountain. 2 nights before 02/03/17. It isn't proof. It is a fingertip on glass, a fogged oval that says someone stood here and exhaled with purpose. The rumor mill shifts gears the way a boat shifts wakes when something larger passes. It says the quiet one buried keepsakes. It says the helper knows where. It says a horse rancher inland remembers a man showing up with a shovel and a story about fence lines. We visit the rancher. He is wary of being useful and then, suddenly, aching to be. He points us to a copse of trees where the soil has that look. Settled, but not content. We grit it. We go slow. We find not a cache of trophies, but a rusted coffee can with nails and a folded receipt from a bait shop where the cashier once remembered him always asking the time. We build patience like scaffolding. We do not pretend this is a ladder. At the jail, the quiet one asks for his attorney, and then, in the seconds it takes for someone to fetch the phone, asks a guard what day it is. He seems surprised fresh days still happen. He asks whether storms usually veer right at the last minute. The guard says sometimes. He says, sometimes isn't a plan. The guard writes that down because sometimes a sentence that isn't a confession still belongs in a file. The talkative helper develops a cough that keeps pace with court dates. The DA's team files motions crisp enough to shave with. The lead detective, who has learned to distrust arcs that look satisfying too soon, drives to the boat ramp and watches the black water hold the sky like a secret. He sits in the parked car and lets the old photograph ride shotgun. He holds it so the ramp lines up with the real thing. He times taillights from the bridge, names each model out of habit, listens for an engine with a specific cough from a repair that never quite took. It doesn't come. What comes is a memory he didn't know he saved. A call from a fisherman in 2004 about a chain snagged on something heavy, the weight letting go all at once, the chain coming up clean and wet and smelling wrong. He pulls the ancient report. The coordinates are vague. Men with boats measure distance in weather and luck. But the tide tables for that night line up with a sliver of deep beside the ramp. Divers go in like punctuation marks at the end of sentences we're not brave enough to stop writing. They bring up nothing sexy, no smoking gun that refuses to be anything but a gun, only a nest of line and a coil of leader wire that measures the same gauge as the coil from the bungalow tackle box. Common, the defense will say, common as rain. But this coil carries a tiny burr snag that aligns with a manufacturing batch we can pin to a season, a shipment that ended up at 3 shops within a 50-mile radius, 2 of which the quiet one shopped because there's loyalty in men who prefer cash. The shop owner, a woman with a ledger brain and the blunt sweetness of someone who sells bait for a living, points to an entry. Bulk leader wire, early August 2003, handwritten note. Guy with limp says he's building shark leaders, a detail that would be a hobby if not for the way the wire remembers tension inconsistent with fish. We set up an experimental reconstruction. The lab builds a door frame to diner specs and mounts a striker plate of the model tied to the purchase. A forensic podiatrist, yes, that's a profession, yes, we needed one, analyzes the scuff pattern from 2003 against contemporary kicks from men with similar weight and gait. The heel drag ratio is a fingerprint we didn't know feet had the decency to carry. It matches the quiet one's limp profile. The expert speaks softly, like a person who handles panes of glass. The jury pool, when they eventually hear it, will either lean in or blink. That is the risk with science that isn't made for television. The storm jogs toward us and then shrugs, a bully distracted. Bands of rain tap the courthouse windows during a status conference where the judge reminds counsel that theatrics are for other rooms. The DA lays out an intent narrative that doesn't chase motive so much as it maps practice. The backdoor test, the latch knowledge, the alley rehearsals, the storage unit purges, the wire, the washer, the hinge, the photographs of places chosen for privacy, like old men choose shade. The defense counters with chaos, an alley full of strangers, a county of pickups, a drawer full of washers, a door that any man might scuff, a coincidence that learned to stack itself into a totem. The judge allows both paths to exist, a geometry only courtrooms and grief can bear. We return, again, to the silver sedan, to the thread of blonde hair that caught a seashell in 2003 and refused to let go. Advanced techniques slit atoms for sport now, and a re-extraction finds a trace of foreign mitochondrial whisper clinging where we earlier found nothing but her. It's a shadow of a shadow, but it edges closer to the quiet one's maternal line than to the helper's, a family tree's echo bleeding into a car mat after a night that decided to be a headline. We will not call it proof. We will call it gravity, and we will watch whether objects fall toward it. In town, the diner's night shift gets a new floodlight for the alley. It's surgical bright, lunar, a white square that turns shadows honest. Patrons complain and then learn to love it. The sign by the register grows another line in the smallest font yet. Tip your server, honor the lock. It is half joke, half spell. A teenager on the late shift looks at the frame near the register and makes a quiet vow to walk out in groups, to call a friend from the back step, to never let quiet be the last sound. This is how a town heals, by making new habits heavy enough to drag the old ones into daylight. The talkative helper cracks on a Thursday nobody picked in the office pool. He asks to see the DA, then the detective, then a pastor, then sits with his own breath until it arranges itself into statements. He doesn't confess so much as he rearranges blame into a shape he can look at in daylight. He says he didn't touch her. He says he waited in the truck with the engine on. He says the quiet one would have walked away if she hadn't fought, as if fighting were the offense. He says he never went near the water. He says he knows where a second lanyard piece fell in 2003. He draws a map that feels like a scavenger hunt designed by a coward who wants to be called brave. We verify because verification is our religion now. Behind a chain-link fence 3 inches into soil that remembers boots, we find a lanyard clasp corroded into a smile. It is not a miracle. It is a nail in a long board finally learning the art of straight lines. The DA weighs a deal in a room that smells like coffee and burnt nerves. Accessory. Tampering. Years that add up and subtract nothing. Truth in exchange for testimony. The talkative helper wants mercy visible from the front porch. The DA wants facts that don't wobble. The detective wants the mother's eyes to see something that lets them close. The judge will want precedent and posture and the confidence that what we build here won't crack in appellate weather. The storm offshore dissolves into memory, rain scrubbing the boardwalk clean of footprints that didn't matter. The town exhales, then inhales like it remembered something. In the jail, the quiet one hears about the helper and does not flinch. He asks for thicker socks. He asks if the vending machine in the visitation room ever gets new candy or if it's stuck in 2011. He asks whether trials are delayed for storms. He asks what happens if a witness is wrong. The guard says that's why there are 12. He says 12 is a lot of people to get to agree. The guard says that's the point. He folds his hands. He studies his thumbs like they might provide alibis. The camera blinks. The clock on the wall insists on moving. At the church, candles pick up again. Short flames, stubborn as truth. A choir practices a hymn that isn't about justice but could be, in the way harmonies forgive soloists for being human. The mother sits in the back but leaves before the closing chord, heading home along a route that doesn't pass the diner because even victory lanes have potholes. She stops at the inlet instead, watches the tide do its unarguable work, breathes in salt that tastes less like loss and more like fact. At home, she turns the porch light on for 3 minutes just to remember the switch, then off again, because some decisions need to outlast headlines. In the DA's office, the board gets one new line and one old circle. A trial date stares back, a mouth ready for words. The phrase, Florida, 2003 cold case solved, hangs in the air like neon with a loose wire. Bright, buzzing, imperfect, insistent. We do not dim it. We do not worship it. We walk beneath it into rooms that demand nouns over adjectives, weight over shine, proof over poetry. And still, the voice in your ear, the one that started at 4:12 a.m., the one that learned the map of this town by heart, keeps its tempo. A door scuffed by a limp, a hinge that bred a twin, a washer that remembered sweat, a wire that learned the wrong tension, a lanyard clasp smiling from the dirt, a reflection on water that refused to lie, a mother who turned the light off and taught the night how to behave. The camera doesn't blink this time, the tape doesn't stutter, the sentence doesn't stop. Jury selection begins like a tide chart nobody trusts, a grid of names and occupations and excuses pulled into the courtroom and sorted by a ritual older than the paint on the benches. They sit in rows with faces that say commuter, cashier, contractor, retired, restless, and the clerk calls them by numbers so no one has to hear how ordinary the backbone of justice sounds when it answers to itself. The judge explains burdens and standards and the presumption that stands in front of every accused like a quiet bodyguard in a dark suit. The DA listens for certainties, for people who believe science is a map, not a suggestion. The defense listens for doubt, for the blessed chorus of maybe that can break a symphony if it enters on the right beat. A teacher who lost a nephew to a hit and run asks whether memory is a reliable witness. A nurse says bodies tell the truth if you know how to listen. A mechanic laughs when someone calls washers ordinary. Nothing is ordinary once you hold it up to light, he says, and the room tilts by a degree you can feel in your teeth. The quiet one watches with that half-lidded intensity of a man cataloging exits in every new room. His jaw doesn't move, but his fingers mark time against the underside of the table in a pattern the bailiff knows he will remember later without understanding why. The talkative helper is led in separately for his hearing on lesser charges and glances at the jury pool with the shame of a man who wants them all to know he's part of the script and none of them to guess which lines he begged for. The mother in the front row does not bow her head. She keeps her eyes open like a lighthouse that refuses to blink while boats misbehave. Opening statements arrive with the precise drama of rain that finally decides where to fall. The DA stands, not loud, never loud, and draws a straight thread from the lanyard hinge to the washer to the wire to the door jamb, scuffed to the limp to the storage unit swept too clean to be innocent. She doesn't promise motive. Motive is a luxury. She promises practice, pattern, opportunity, and a series of choices so consistent they stop needing names. She says Florida 2003 cold case solved only once, and only to tell the jury it isn't a phrase she intends to rely on. She prefers verbs that survive cross-examination. The defense counters with a mosaic of chaos theory, an alley's worth of strangers, a county's worth of caps, a decade's worth of error margins. They say contamination like a prayer for men who hate microscopes. They whisper coincidence the way gamblers whisper lucky numbers. They call our map a story, and our story a storm of confirmation bias that drenches anyone who steps outside without an umbrella. Witnesses parade with the nervous dignity of people who do not want to be on camera but understand they are the camera now. The maintenance trainee turned man with worry lines retells the sentence that kept him awake for weeks. Backdoors always tell on you. And in the telling, he becomes less a witness than a tuning fork for the room. The jurors lean toward him the way plants lean toward a window. The lab tech explains the burr snag on the leader wire with the tenderness of someone unwrapping a family heirloom. And for a moment, the courtroom remembers that manufacturing is a kind of destiny, and batches are bloodlines in a colder language. The forensic podiatrist, smiling a little at the title everyone always smiles at, walks the jury through gait physics, heel abrade patterns, the math of limps that leave signatures. A juror from row 2 unconsciously mimics the limp under his chair and catches himself, embarrassed at how easily the body volunteers to be evidence. The defense brings out their own experts, men and women who can make a statistical model sound like a lullaby that sees monsters under every bed and calls them all dust bunnies. Transfer, they say, secondary, tertiary, the way washers travel from hand to hand, from bench to toolbox to floorboard, leaving pieces of you behind like tips at restaurants you can't afford. They produce a doorframe scuffed by a healthy man in brand new boots and ask the podiatrist if his ratios still sing when the song changes. They ask the lab tech if dust ever lies. They ask the maintenance trainee if jokes about doors can age into menacing prophecy because a town needs them to. The boat ramp photographs. The dusk, the reflection like tail lights singing to water, are admitted with the solemnity of relics. The enhancement specialist explains pixels with the patience of a clockmaker. He shows the toolbox silhouette. He shows how the angle of the ramp and the tide conspire to prove that something boxed in metal and flush to a cab was there when and where a person needed privacy. The defense calls it a Rorschach. You see what grief trains you to see. The jury sees both, the shadow and the hands holding it up to light. On the second week, the talkative helper takes a deal shaped like an admission without the music of a confession. Accessory, tampering, sentences you can see the end of if you stand on the right hill. He testifies with the flat tone of a man reading road directions too slowly for the turn you're already in. He says he idled. He says he never left the truck. He says he watched the alley flood with a silence that didn't sound like a Saturday. He points at a map where the lanyard clasp was found and doesn't look at the mother, and that is his worst decision of the morning. The room judges cowardice more harshly than crime. On cross, the defense asks him how much relief costs per year served. He answers nothing, then everything, then asks for water. We put the silver sedan's re-extracted whisper on the board. Partial mitochondrial, maternal line leaning toward the quiet one's tree. The geneticist is careful, painfully careful, a tightrope walker of caveats. She says not exclusive, not definitive, but consistent like the way a coastline repeats itself if you zoom out far enough. The defense nods along. Consistency is a cousin to coincidence, they say. Cousins don't inherit each other's sins. The judge reminds the jury that science is a compass, not an autopilot. The mother watches a diagram of mitochondria light up on the monitor and thinks, privately, about how women carry and carry and carry until there is no room left for anything but names. Between days, the town pretends it normal. The diner's coffee tastes a little like tin on mornings when the generator hiccups, but nobody complains. A fisherman leaves a rose at the base of the blank billboard that used to promise tires because no other place felt like a grave marker that wouldn't be stealing from someone else's. At the church, a child asks why the candles are always half melted. The choir director says that's how you can tell they're doing their job. At home, the detective flips through old notes and finds a scribble that makes his breath snag. A toll receipt from the helper's truck, time-stamped 2:26 a.m., and scribbled in the margin in someone else's hand the words "cutting back." Cutting back to what? To who? He closes his eyes and traces the highway in his mind like a braided rope. Cross-examination of the lead detective is a polite attempt at undoing a quilt square by square without pricking a finger. Why did you focus on him? When did you stop looking at anyone else? How many men wore caps, limps, toolboxes, lanyards? The detective answers the way men answer when they've learned to subtract themselves from their own stories. He says we never stopped. We narrowed. We tested. We circled. We ran the routine until repetition wore a groove we could measure. He doesn't say the part where he drives the boat ramp at night and lets the map talk to the water. He doesn't say how much he has learned to hate the word closure. He does say that the word solved should come with a receipt and a return policy. Then comes the camera. The frozen frame at 02:03:17, the hiccup that guarded a secret like a bad magician, becomes a small miracle of patience. The specialist who coaxed an extra half-second earlier returns with a new trick, one he almost didn't try because it never works on tape this old. A polarizing algorithm that scavenges reflections from dull metals. The chrome strip on the back door loves it. A smear resolves into angles, a brim's line, a cheek notch. Not a face, never a face, but a geometry of choices repeated night after night by a man who wanted the alley to be a stage that answered only to him. The brim angle matches photographs of the quiet one at the company picnic, the same tilt, the same attempt at erasing height by pretending to look down. The defense says hats tilt. The jury makes a note, and the note, whatever it says, weighs something when it lands. In the third week, a janitor from the courthouse, older than the paint, younger than the myth, asks to speak with the DA. He remembers the helper from years back, a plumbing job in the courthouse basement in 2004, a toolbox with a missing lid, a coil of wire used to fish a clog out of a drain with a patience that didn't suit a man on the clock. He remembers a joke. Leader wire solves anything if you pull hard enough. And he remembers it because it didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a map. He gives us the purchase order for the plumbing job. It overlaps with the week the helper swore he was out of town recovering from the flu. The defense shrugs, men lie about colds. The jury looks at the helper's hands and sees a scar on the thumb shaped like a man trying to pull something that didn't want to come. We drive another search warrant into the past, the scrap lot where the helper's truck skeleton breathed weeds. Under the seat rails, forgotten by rust and luck, a penny sealed in grime and glue with a year that matters, 2003, and a faint smear of polymer shimmer like the kind lab techs found on the stove fabric. Cosmetic mica that rides in lemon lotion and lingers in the tight corners of machines. The penny isn't a proof, it's a chorus joining a melody the town has been humming long enough to harmonize. The defense calls a surprise. A man who did 6 months in county on a bad check and claims the quiet one cried in the shower and said he wanted to go home. The courtroom tightens. The judge tilts her head. The DA lets him have his minute of attention, then asks whether wanting to go home is exculpatory, whether tears cleanse, whether the shower ran hot enough to scald the decade. He shrinks. The jury looks at the mother, and the mother's eyes do not move. We end the week with weather. A squall blows through, hurling palm fronds like punctuation, slapping rain against the courthouse windows so hard the microphones hiccup. In that stutter, the DA leans closer to the jury box and says what everyone has said without saying for months. Solved is a banner, but your job is a verdict. The word solved belongs to headlines. The word guilty or not guilty belongs to you. She doesn't look at the quiet one. She looks at the lanyard clasp in its little plastic coffin, at the fabric scrap, at the washer, at the wire coil, at the photograph of water remembering red, and then at the chair where the victim would have sat if 020317 had been a normal second instead of a hinge on which a town turned. Night brings the boardwalk back to itself. Wet wood glow, neon low, gulls quiet like an orchestra that hasn't been dismissed but knows the conductor has set down the baton. The detective stands at the inlet with his hands in his pockets and counts. The hinges, the washers, the wire, the scrap, the cap, the limp, the helper's cough, the mother's porch light turned off and off again. He thinks about the way currents gather small things and make them inevitable. He thinks about the word accomplice, with its double C and double S, the kind of letter that loops back on itself until you can't tell whether it's tying a knot or untying one. He thinks about a fisherman who cut his chain because the weight below fought wrong. He thinks about a jury that will need clean oars and steady arms to row across a river made of evidence and absence in equal measure. In bedrooms across the county, people dream badly. They see chrome strips and brim lines and door jamb scuffs. They wake to the weather radio hissing and wonder if storms can be subpoenaed. The talkative helper sleeps like a man trying to persuade his own lungs. The quiet one stares at a ceiling that offers no maps. The mother touches the ring with the 3 letters and finally, lets the porch light stay off through the whole night and into the dawn, as if she's teaching the house a new habit while the town decides whether Florida 2003 cold case solved is a headline or a prophecy, a verdict or a vow they will have to keep repeating until repetition becomes the only kind of truth that knows how to last. Not the real door. Time ate that. A reconstruction built to diner specs, paint matched to a photograph that remembered color better than it remembered people. The bailiff rolls it to center stage like an exhibit that has rehearsed its entrance. The forensic team has aged it on purpose. Scuffs, grease ghosts, the faint crescent where a key once missed its target, and the room leans forward in a single breath you can almost hear. The jurors watch as the striker plate, same model, same metal, sourced from a dusty storeroom with ledgers that spelled the past in pencil, meets a latch at the exact pressure it would have felt at 2:03 a.m. A clean click. Then the podiatrist, soft voice, steady hands, a dignity that rejects TV, demonstrates a heel drag against the jamb, the angle long remembered by wood and paint in 2003, the angle a limp writes the way tides write sand. The ratio sings again, the math of a gate that doesn't lie even when its owner does. Not a fingerprint, the expert says, calm as tide tables, but a signature. The defense notes that penmanship can be forged. The jurors hear both. The room learns again that truth in here is a slow accretion, shell to shell. Outside, the storm that almost was leaves the kind of air that makes radios sound nostalgic. Inside, the DA threads the tightrope. She adds the janitor's basement memory about leader wire solving anything if you pull hard enough, the toll receipt that stamped 2:26 a.m. on a truck that swore it was elsewhere, the toolbox outline mirrored in water at dusk, the penny sealed under seat rails, mica shimmering like an apology found too late. She doesn't promise motive. Mattic Bion isn't a motive, it's a wound that learns grammar, but she promises practice. Practice is a motive in slow motion. The quiet one catalogs exits with that tired tilt. He picks an invisible point on the back wall and stares until even the cameras get bored. The talkative helper sits with the slack posture of men who think gravity is a verdict. In the second row, the mother's hands are still, folded the way you fold flags, not to decorate but to respect. The defense shifts to theater. They erect a cardboard alley on a table and roll a die-cast truck through with comic precision. They measure cap brims with calipers as if angle were innocence. They read from the Bible of reasonable doubt, the chapter where contamination haunts every swab, where washers breed in tool drawers, where coincidence is a god with a cruel sense of humor. They bring a salesman from a marine supply catalog who swears burr snags happen in batches too big to matter. They cross the enhancement specialist until pixels sound like liars who agree on nothing but their own unreliability. You see what you want, they say, eyes bright the way gamblers' eyes get when the dealer is distracted. Rorschach justice. And the judge who knows storms and stories lets it all stand as long as it stands on something. When a question leans too hard, she touches the brake. When a witness flutters, she steadies the air. She understands that a town doesn't just need a verdict, it needs to remember how verdicts are made when the tide is loud. A courier hustles in a manila envelope at noon with the earnestness of people who still believe paper can save the day. Inside, a final forensic pass on the fabric scrap from behind the stove, the one embarrassed pink that tried not to say its name. The lab pulled trace particles from the warp nobody thought would yield. A minuscule crust of evaporated salt in the grease mix that doesn't match table salt. It leans toward brine. Could be from sweaty kitchens. Could be from ocean air. Could be from hands that had just handled something pulled wet from a ramp where water does not pretend to be clean. The DA doesn't grin. She files it under gravity, the quiet pull that makes stories fall in one direction even when arguments try to fling them up. Afternoons taste like tin on the courthouse air. A deputy eats a sandwich that squeaks. The reporter from the city station practices saying mitochondrial twice in a row without swallowing the second half. The clerk peels tape from a box marked exhibits with the tenderness of someone who has learned that objects can be more faithful than men. The detective walks the stairwell two at a time, the case file a weight that refuses to redistribute no matter how he holds it. He texts the dive team leader a single question mark. The answer is a photograph of a coil of wire, twin to twin to twin, drying on a towel like a sea snake that changed its mind about living. Late day witness. The fisherman with the logbook, neat cursive, notes like prayer. He testifies to a favor for M and L at the ramp 2 weeks before she vanished. A battery jump that ended with laughter that didn't sound like relief. He points. There, at the exact spot where the reflection in the shoebox photo doubled itself, and says he never parks there because the angle is wrong unless you're hiding from headlights. The defense asks if fishermen exaggerate. He says only when fish are involved. The jurors smirk. The mother does not. Night unthreads. The boardwalk hangs neon like apology. The storm memory leaves gutters ticking. In the jail, the quiet one asks a guard about shoes. Do they replace them, or do men walk the same soles thin? The guard says we don't go barefoot in here. He nods as if that's the kindest thing anyone has said today. The helper coughs into a towel and writes something in the palm of his hand that the cameras can't read. Men make their own oracles when courts won't give them one. Day 11 opens with a ghost, a city records clerk in a cardigan older than some subpoena's wheels and an ancient microfilm reader, its lamp dim, its gears patient. She found, misfiled under parade again because fate refuses fresh jokes, 2 additional frames that bracket the 0203 freeze. Not the alley, not the face, but the chrome again. The door strip blooming and dimming with the rhythm of motion, the brim's angle moving from one reflection to another across a pane of glass, as if the hat were measuring the door by habit. It's almost nothing, a shimmer insisting on its right to be counted. The defense stands to object, sits when the judge lifts a hand the way a traffic cop stops tourists from making mistakes they can't afford. A surprise from the back bench, the first responder from 2003, now retired, shoulders squared by years of being wrong in public and learning to live anyway. She remembers the sedan's air still warm, the lemon lotion note in the cabin, the register closed, the coffee thinking about giving up. But what stuck is what she never put in her report because it felt like rumor. The alley's light flickered once, as if a shadow crossed it slowly. She can't date a flicker. She can't measure it. She offers it because sometimes what the body remembers is the last honest thing in the room. The defense does not cross. The jurors write something the shape of a sigh. Lunch break is a wandering line around food trucks that know the courthouse calendar better than the sun. A man selling tacos asks the detective if anyone ever gets used to this. He says no and orders 2, one for the board, one for muscle memory. The mother sits on a bench under a palm that insists on shedding even in good weather. A stranger leaves a sealed bottle of water 2 feet away and keeps walking. Generosity in trials travels like a stray dog. Shows up, doesn't look you in the eye, does the right thing anyway. After lunch, the DA calls a witness the defense thought dead, the storage unit manager's old assistant, a woman with a laugh like a seatbelt clicking. She moved away in 2005, a job in a city where the ocean stays put in pictures. She watched the coverage and felt a minute she'd lost. On the day the quiet one cleared his unit, she says, he paid for an extra hour he didn't need. He waited 10 minutes before rolling the door up. He stood with his hand on the corrugated metal like a man measuring heartbeat through a rib cage. When he left, he wiped the lip at the back with a rag and then, absurdly, folded the rag into a square and tossed it into a dumpster 2 rows down. Why remember that? The defense asks. Because I hate rags, she says, and the room laughs, and in the laugh is the relief of a human detail that smells like truth. The helper's turn on the stand is a maze built on weathered wood. He enters, avoids eye contact with the mother, sits, rearranges his face into neutrality, and fails. The DA walks him through the map he drew in exchange for air slightly closer to fresh. It leads to the chain-link fence and the lanyard clasp, to the spot by the ramp where the truck idled, to the alley curve where the brim would have met chrome. He protects the quiet one reflexively, the way men protect the myth of themselves. He didn't mean to, he says, then hears it and corrects. I didn't see. On cross, the defense takes him apart with the patience of a person knotting rope. You got years for words. How many words do you owe us? He looks at his hands, the scar on his thumb bright now that someone has named it. All of them, he says, too late. The judge calls sidebars that look like choreography. Counsel drawn close, voices down, decisions made at a volume grief can't overhear. Emotion slides in. Defense wants the reflection frames quashed. DA wants the helper's map in whole. The judge splits the difference with a precision that feels like an answer key to a test nobody wanted to take. The jury is ushered out, then in, then out again. They learn to own their posture. One of them, Mechanic, the one who said nothing is ordinary under light, leans forward every time the word hinge appears, as if that syllable alone deserves gravity. Evenings blur. The city station runs a segment titled Cold Case Kongdong Bang Huang, with B-roll of gulls and courthouse steps and the blank billboard like a jaw missing teeth. Comments flood and curdle and float. Everyone knows someone who knows the truth. Everyone knows the mother deserved a different decade. The mother ignores them. She opens the freezer, pulls out a casserole labeled with a name she can't recall, heats it, eats 3 bites, leaves the rest. Grief and hunger cross paths and nod without stopping. On day 14, a small miracle with no flair, the reprocessed toll data yields a second camera angle at the plaza, oblique, grainy, allergic to clarity, that catches the helper's truck minutes after the timestamp we know, southbound, toolbox, shadow unmistakable, and behind it, too close for courtesy, the silhouette of a second vehicle with a bumper chrome line at the exact height of the quiet one's old pickup. The defense objects to unmistakable like it's a personal affront. The judge swaps it for consistent with and moves on. The jury sees shadow following shadow down a road out of town, and maybe that's all a story ever is. The DA rests without flourish. She stands with palms flat on oak and says the words she saved for once. We do not claim magic. We claim momentum. We claim practice and pattern and choices that cohere. We claim a town that watched and waited and would not let the headline be the last sentence. She doesn't look at the quiet one. She looks at the chair where the victim would have sat. She says her name and lets the room hold it, a weight that resists metaphor. The defense begins its close like a storm deciding not to land. They throw every maybe onto the scale, every what if that makes jurors stare at the ceiling and count holes they never noticed. They remind everyone that science bends, that witnesses age, that memory loves applause, that cops are storytellers when they have to be. They say solved is a billboard, not a map. They say Florida eats evidence. Salt chews it. Time mocks it. They brand the helper a paid poet of regret. Night again unspools. The detective returns to the ramp and sits with the old photograph until dusk agrees to be the same color twice. He listens to the water shoulder boats. He imagines the alley's bulb and the brim's angle and the chrome strip agreeing to tell on a man because doors always do. He counts to 2:26 on his watch and says aloud to no one, cutting back to what? And the words feel like a key looking for a door that has been moved 1 inch to the left. Morning answers with a small sound. In the evidence lab, a technician cataloging the lanyard clasp smiles at a thing nobody asked for. A faint indentation along the clasp's inside edge, a tiny crescent like a tooth that wasn't a tooth, consistent with contact against a metal ring of a certain diameter. The ring, the hinge ring, the twin in the tackle box that wanted to pretend it was just hardware. The DA adds it to the last board. No fireworks, just a thread tied but not yanked. The judge reads the charge instructions with the gravity of a lighthouse reciting rules to water. She tells the jury what beyond means. She tells them what reasonable refuses to be. She gives them the map and refuses to walk it for them. The bailiff collects phones. The door to deliberation shuts with a soft click that sounds louder than sirens because silence is the loudest thing in a town that has been listening for years. Outside, the sky behaves. Inside, chairs adjust. 12 people make a circle out of straight-backed rectangles and acquaint themselves with the weight of choosing. They lay out the washer, the hinge, the wire, the scratch, the brim, the limp, the helper's map, the reflection, the toll logs, the coin, the mica, the fabric, the mother's hands. They put Florida on the table in miniature, an inlet of exhibits, a coastline of doubt, a storm of detail that doesn't know how to be anything but weather. One says guilty, one says not yet, one says tell me the door again. They try on the sentence the world wrote for them, Florida 2003 cold case solved, and find the hem is raw and the stitching earnest, and they tug gently to see which threads hold and which are just decoration. The town waits with practiced breath. The church candles lean and correct themselves. The diner pours coffee that tastes like relief and regret in equal parts. The detective stares at a hallway scuff and decides not to assign it meaning. The helper counts ceiling tiles in a different room and rehearses a future he cannot make straight. The quiet one watches a fly land and lift and land again and thinks about doors, which never stop telling on you if you've taught them how. The mother stands in her kitchen, turns the ring with 3 letters once, twice, 3 times, and leaves the porch light off on purpose until the sun decides to take its shift, because in a town like this, solved isn't a finish line. It's a word we speak quietly, together, or not at all. They take the case into the room where towns are measured. No cameras, no microphones, only the arithmetic of 12 people trying to weigh a decade. And the first sound is the scrape of chairs pushed toward a table that looks suddenly too small for Florida, too small for wire coils and hinges and lanyard clasps and chrome strips that learned how to hold secrets. The foreperson is a teacher who once said nothing is ordinary under light. She lays out the verdict form like a compass and asks everyone to speak before anyone decides. A mechanic clears his throat and says the door talked to him, the curl of paint, the math of the heel, the way practice leaves handwriting when you're not watching. A nurse says the fabric scrap sang salt, not the table kind, the kind that rides breath and tide and hangs on skin after contact with black water. A retiree admits she doesn't trust enhanced frames, but does trust the weird shape of coincidence when it stops being a parade and starts being a formation. A man who mows lawns for a living counts wires on his fingers and says he's never seen a coil with a memory that sharp unless it learned tension wrong. In the corner, a young woman who doesn't like speaking in crowds chews her pen cap and nods and writes one word on a sticky note and sticks it to the edge of the verdict form where only she can see: gravity. Down the hall, the DA stands by the window with palms pressed to glass as if feeling for weather through courthouse skin. She knows law better than she knows storms, and still she can smell a turn. The defense ties a tie that does not need tying, flicks a speck of nothing from a cuff, and catalogs escape hatches with a clarity that borders on prayer. Mistrial on a technicality, appeal on a frame, a jury who refuses to be the town's choir. The detective sits on a bench, elbows on knees, eyes on shoes, and lets the clock be ordinary. He will not make time clever. He has had enough of clever time. The mother waits in the corridor with a thermos of coffee untouched because heat that comes from metal feels wrong now. She watches the hallway door like it's a horizon, and the gulf might put a boat where none should be. The talkative helper paces a cell and counts to 12 and back again, pinched by a truth that won't look him in the face. The quiet one stares at a cinder block and tries to remember how to blink in ways that don't look like codes. In deliberations, they start with the wire because it's less like a story and more like a tool. The mechanic flips open his palm like a field guide. The coil from the inlet, the coil from the tackle box, the burr that matches a batch, the shop owner's ledger with the note about a limp and shark leaders, the janitor's sentence about pulling hard enough, the fisherman's log about M and L and a battery that didn't die so much as pretend. The teacher draws a circle and writes practice in the middle and draws lines to edges labeled door, wire, washer, hinge, toll. The lawn man taps the toll time, 2:26 a.m., and says, "Cutting back," the phrase the detective couldn't dislodge from the margin of his notes, and the room tilts toward a map they've memorized without wanting to. The retiree wants motive, like a poem wants rhyme. The nurse shakes her head and says motive is often a decoration that fools the eye. The job was done by practice and an hour and a habit of moving where cameras couldn't stare long enough to be useful. They argue about their chrome reflections because arguing is respect here. One juror calls it a Rorschach, another says Rorschach tests are still tests, you don't get to make up ink. The teacher says even if you throw away the brim angle, you still have the heel ratio eating the paint, the hinge that mated to a twin in the tackle box like a coin finding its face, the lanyard clasp with a crescent bite that matches the ring diameter, the mica on the penny, and the kitchen scrap humming the same mineral like a chorus out of sight. Someone asks, what if the helper is the spine and the quiet one just the rumor? The nurse says the mitochondrial whisper doesn't choose the helper's tree. The lawn man says men like the helper don't wait with engines idling if they aren't part of someone else's orbit. The foreperson holds the form by the corner and says, "Don't write yet." They break for air that smells like rain that changed its mind. The hallway bristles when the door opens and closes, the word BTAC floating like a superstition past its expiration date. A clerk replenishes water pitchers with the reverence of someone who knows hydration is how arguments stay human. Outside, a low gray hangs over the gulf like a promise to misbehave later. The obituary of the blank billboard, that skeletal highway sign over the bone cut, gets another stapled note. Someone scrawls, "We're still here." The town knows how to wait. It learned at porches and boat ramps and in stores buying batteries for storms that sometimes don't arrive but always change how the shelves look. Back in the room, they run the door again. Not physically, but the math of it. The podiatrist's ratios become a chant in the teacher's voice. A limp is not a costume. It's choreography the body can't forget. The defense's cardboard alley makes a cameo in conversation. Someone laughs, then says, "No, be fair. Doubt is a duty, not a joke." They line up doubts like chairs against a wall and ask each to sit properly. Contamination. They walk the chain of custody and find no brakes that can carry the weight the defense hung on them. Common parts? Washers are everywhere until they stop being everywhere because they carry sweat that sings someone's name if you teach a machine to hear a whisper. Memory? The witness with the sentence about back doors earned his verbs. He didn't embellish, didn't decorate. He brought one line and it fit the keyhole like it had been carved under long weather. The enhanced frames? They park them on the periphery, not because they don't matter, but because a case that depends on shimmer is not a case. A case that uses shimmer as a garnish has meat elsewhere. They take a night, not because the judge asks, but because the bodies in the room ask. The teacher tells them not to look at news. They don't. They go home to houses that smell like damp wood and laundry and the quiet of people who are learning to live with the sound of their own minds. The mother goes home and doesn't cook and doesn't pretend to eat. She watches the inlet from her window instead and counts the invisible boats. The detective goes back to the ramp because rituals are anchors. He lets dusk sit in his back seat again and hears a gull laugh at nothing. He can almost name the cough of an engine he'll never hear again. The helper sleeps like a man who wants to dream alibis into existence and wakes with the same scar. The quiet one stares at the ceiling where a spider finds geometry more honest than human lines. Morning brings pastries nobody eats. The foreperson sets the verdict form in the center and says gently the word burden as if it had hinges. They go around the table and give their weather reports. Heavy, clearing, unsettled, clearing, heavy with clearing at noon. The retiree says she dreamed the chrome strip told her a joke and she didn't get it. Everyone laughs and the laugh saves the room from thinking it's a church. The mechanic says he can testify from the pew of his life that bolts sit in hands like truth. You can feel it. The nurse says bodies keep secrets that paperwork can't hide. The lawn man says the toll cameras don't know how to lie. They only know how to miss, and this time they didn't miss enough. The quiet juror peels off her sticky note and slides it to the middle, and the word gravity somehow makes a sound when it lands. They take a vote they know isn't the last. Hands go up, 9, 3, then 10, 2, then a pause that feels like a song waiting for the drum. The two want to walk the alley one more time, in minds we mean. They retrace steps from door to car, to corner to highway, to ramp, to bungalow, to storage unit, to courthouse, to water, to wire. They stop at 020317 and say what if. The teacher says then go back to 226 and say what if not. They tip the scale with a lanyard's crescent and a washer's whisper and a door jam's honest paint. and the helper's cough and a coin that wore shimmer under a seat only one truck carried. The two look at one another, and one says, "I'm there," and the other says, "I'm almost there," and the room breathes together so it doesn't spook the moment. Downstairs, the gallery stirs like a tide change. The local station has the chyron ready, and the anchor practices serious warmth. The DA drinks water the way you drink when your throat remembers desert. The defense checks a phone with no messages that will help. The detective ties his shoe because hands should do something. The mother stands very straight and runs her thumb along the ridge of the thermos like it were a worry stone, like it were a timeline she could smooth. The foreperson fills the form. The pen doesn't hesitate, it doesn't scribble flourish. It writes what it writes like a contractor writing down the cost of material you can't haggle over. They knock once. The bailiff opens the door as if the room were a boat returning to harbor with a load that will need careful hands. In the courtroom, wood creaks with the weight of people leaning forward into the same future. The jury files in with faces that are not TV. They are tired and ordinary and holy. The clerk asks, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" And the foreperson says yes, in a voice that makes the word neutral and brave at once. The reading is swift because ceremony doesn't need speed to be solemn. The clerk says the charges. The foreperson says the word the town trained itself not to say out loud in advance. The quiet one does not blink. The talkative helper stares at the floor as if the pattern might negotiate for him. The defense drops shoulders a fraction, then picks them up because men are watching. The DA doesn't smile. She looks at the mother. The mother closes her eyes once, long enough to put a small stone in a place where a bigger stone used to sit, and when she opens them, the room looks back like a place that has acquired edges. The judge thanks the jury in the way you thank people who moved a mountain 1 teaspoon at a time. The foreperson sits and breathes the kind of breath that makes muscles realize they've been ordering oxygen on credit. The courtroom vibrates with the stifled report of people making decisions about facial expressions. Cry, don't cry, nod, don't nod, clap, never clap. The reporter outside hums into her mic about Florida 2003 cold case solved. And for once the banner doesn't flicker. It stands even if the wind is fickle. The detective shakes a hand he doesn't remember offering and hears the ocean in the AC ducts because sometimes buildings remember what they were before they were halls of rule. The quiet one asks a deputy whether the vending machine ever changes candy. The deputy says sometimes they fill the top row with something new, and he says, "Sometimes isn't a plan." And the line goes into someone's notebook because sentences like that deserve a shelf, even if they're not testimonials, even if they're only the way guilt hides. The helper signs a paper with a pen that wants to be dramatic and fails. Anyone can sign. Not everyone can hold a line. The mother walks out into light that is not gentle but is honest. She does not speak. She presses her palm to the top of the thermos like she's blessing it, and then lowers her hand. Strangers leave room around her. A corridor forms without tape. At home, she will sit at the kitchen table and turn the ring with 3 letters once, twice, and then not at all for a while, as if stillness were a gift she can finally afford. She will open a window that used to stick and let the inlet into the room without asking it for answers. The porch light will stay off through sunset and into night, and she will not feel unfaithful to the past. She will feel exact. The town exhale is messy. At the diner, someone buys a round of coffee for the room and the cups steam like the start of a shift. A cook tapes a copy of the verdict to a wall near the time clock where men used to scratch names. He adds a note under the framed photo next to the register. Be kind to the late shift. Honor the lock. Walk each other to cars. At the church, the candles are replaced before they finish burning. Not because they failed, but because you do not ask a single flame to carry everything. On the boardwalk, a child asks what solved means, and a parent says it means we stop looking in the same wrong places. We're allowed to look elsewhere now. The detective drives once more to the ramp where the old photograph still fits the dusk if you tilt it a degree left. He stands with hands in pockets and says the name out loud. Once. To the water. It is not a prayer, not quite. But water likes names. They change the way it holds sound. He thinks about doors and how they talk. About wire that learns the wrong tension. About washers that carry the skin's last whisper longer than love would ever ask. About a penny glued to rails with mica dust that traveled from a kitchen to a truck floor in the only way it could. He thinks about Mattic Beyond and how mystery is a room that needs windows if people are to live in it. He doesn't think about closure. He thinks about the next morning and the boxes that need labeling and the stupid miracle of paperwork becoming history. Night opens like a stage with the curtains too heavy for one hand. The television says the headline and the town lets it sit. Nobody corrects the tense. The judge goes home and waters a plant that leans and straightens under a fountain of ordinary. The defense goes to a bar where the music is too loud to argue with. He orders something with ice and watches it melt faster than it should. The DA sits with a bowl of soup that cooled while she wasn't hungry and eats it with the concentration of a person learning to be a person again. The foreperson returns keys to a bowl, folds a sticky note with the word gravity, and slides it into a drawer next to recipes, next to warranties, next to the clutter that proves lives are lived in the mundane between explosions. The camera, if there were one, would float above the inlet and watch porch lights that stay off and a single kitchen window that opens for the first time in a while. It would listen for the sound of a county sleeping less like a guard and more like a place that remembers laughter. It would watch a jail where men learn that time without a plan is a kind of sentence all its own. It would catch the cheap gleam of a vending machine stocked with a top row of new candy and a man who will never eat it tasting the word sometimes and learning what it is not. It would hold, for a long breath, the blank billboard on the highway and the small handwritten note, "We're still here," and the space where someone might write, "Tomorrow or next week, we stayed." And from somewhere under all that, the case file that slept in the hangar and learned to breathe would settle on a shelf, not at the back but not at the front either, labeled with a date and a name and no adjectives, while the voice that began at 4:12 a.m. does not go silent. It lowers, it slows, it keeps a hand on the fader, reminding the town that solved is not a finish line. It's a new rule for how to walk into alleys, how to watch chrome, how to listen when doors tell on us, how to leave the porch light off and still see, how to say her name in rooms where weather, at last, is only weather.